Chapter 49. Phantom Doppelganger. When Ji Yufei extinguished the black figure, he was instantly shocked. This kind of doppelganger technique that was almost like a real person had already surpassed the scope of the Dao techniques that martial cultivators of the awakening self-stage could use. This person is a martial cultivator of the transcending mortality stage. In an instant, Ji Yufei was able to determine the cultivation level of this person. To him, a martial cultivator of the transcending mortality stage was simply too great of a threat. With his current cultivation level, it was absolutely impossible for him to fight against an expert of this level. In the blink of an eye, just as Ji Yufei crushed the doppelganger with a bear hug, he instantly felt a bone-chilling murderous aura attack his body from behind, causing him to quiver and shiver. Then, a wave of magical power that was as vast as the ocean came from behind him. A flaming fist, with a terrifying heat that could melt gold and iron, cut through the void and smashed into his back in an instant. Peng! Ji Yufei was directly smashed into the air by the extremely violent fist force. The moment he was smashed into the air, a large mouthful of blood involuntarily gushed out of Ji Yufei's mouth and the blood splattered outside the bamboo forest. So strong, is this the strength of a martial cultivator of the transcending mortality stage? Although Ji Yufei had used the weapon refining body transformation technique at the critical moment, condensing the chi of the divine weapon transformed from the short purple rod in his body onto his back to block the mysterious person's fist, the power of the flame fist that the mysterious person had struck out was simply too strong. However, the mysterious man's raging flame fist was simply too powerful. Almost with a single punch, the divine weapon chi that he had refined into his body was blasted out of his body. The powerful shock immediately caused Ji Yufei's internal organs to be impacted, causing him to suffer serious internal injuries. If he had not used the weapon refining body transformation technique and the divine weapon that he had melted into his body to block most of the impact, even if this punch could not kill Ji Yufei, it would have at least taken half of his life. However, the mysterious person's attack did not stop there. When he sent Ji Yufei flying, he appeared behind Ji Yufei, as if he had walked out of the void, soundlessly. The black-robed man seemed to open his mouth at Ji Yufei, and suddenly a thin line of fire shot out from his mouth through the black cloth that covered his face. Kai! There was a subtle sound of a sharp blade tearing through cloth. It swept towards Ji Yufei, who had already been sent flying hundreds of feet away and crashed into the bamboo forest. Fiery sword chi! Suddenly, a startled cry rang out from afar. A silhouette flashed as a person rushed over with the speed of the wind. "You are from the Guangcheng Immortal Sect. How dare you come to my Taishian sect to cause trouble?" A beautiful young man in white appeared outside the bamboo forest. This young man raised his hand, and a yellow light shot up into the sky, flying towards Taishian Peak. And at the moment when this young man in white appeared, Ji Yufei, who had been sent flying hundreds of feet away by the black-robed man, was in a desperate situation of life and death. The black-robed man simply wanted Ji Yufei's life, and his attack was extremely vicious. He could not kill Ji Yufei with one punch, so he immediately opened his mouth and spat out a thread-like, 7 or 8 feet long sword chi of raging fire. A flash of fire, in an instant, caught up with Ji Yufei, who had flown hundreds of feet away like a meteor, crashing into the bamboo forest, and wrapped around his neck. The cold sword chi revealed an unparalleled heat, and in an instant, it made Ji Yufei feel like he was trapped between ice and fire. Roar! A feeling of extreme danger assaulted his heart. Without even thinking, Ji Yufei let out a roar that sounded like that of a dying ferocious beast that had been forced into a dead end. His voice was filled with endless anger and unwillingness. At the moment when the fiery sword chi of raging fire was about to wrap around Ji Yufei's neck, a layer of purple light appeared on Ji Yufei's neck. Clang! Sparks flew in all directions. When the fiery sword chi landed on Ji Yufei's neck, it actually emitted the sound of metal rubbing against each other. Then, like a spirit snake, it flew back and once again entered the black-clothed man's mouth. At this time, Ji Yufei smashed into the depths of the bamboo forest. It smashed into the depths of the bamboo forest. Instantly, the ground shook, and the bamboo forest was destroyed. A dozen birds resting in the bamboo forest flapped their wings and flew out. At this time, The handsome young man in white who had suddenly appeared had already attacked the black-robed man. Without seeing how he moved, the ground under the black-robed man's feet suddenly broke open, and emerald-green vines emerged and wrapped around the black-robed man. Those were not ordinary vines. Every vine was covered with dense black thorns. No matter if it was a man or a beast, once they were wrapped around, their skin would be torn and their flesh torn. The black-robed man did not want to be entangled with the white-robed young man. The black-robed man opened a scroll in his hand, and a strange wave of Fa Li immediately rushed out from the scroll and enveloped the black-robed man. The black-robed man's body immediately became blurry, and in the instant that the thousands of vines wrapped around his body, he disappeared on the spot. All that was left in the void was a series of ripples that resembled water. The white-robed young man was stunned. A law technique scroll? And it is a high-level scroll with the space-shifting technique sealed in it. Who is this person? At this time, a vast wave of Fa Li came from the top of Taishan Peak, like a monstrous wave, surging through the mountains. The next moment, a purple figure appeared in the sky above the bamboo forest below Green Spirit Peak. A purple-robed old Taoist stood in the void, exuding a majestic aura from all over his body. At this moment, the aura of a powerhouse who looked down on the world was fully displayed. Greetings to the head of the sect. The white-robed young man outside the bamboo forest immediately bowed when he saw the old Taoist. Ziyu, what the hell is going on? The person who came was the head of the Taishan sect, Taoist Shentian. He looked around and immediately noticed the Fa Li that had yet to dissipate. Taoist Xuantian's expression could not help but change. With Daoist Xuantian's terrifying cultivation base at the 9th heavenly layer of Imperial Void, his Yuan spirit could cover a distance of 100 miles in an instant. But even with such speed, the black-clothed man still managed to escape. As Xuantian's proud person spoke, he pressed his right palm downwards and a figure floated up from the depths of the bamboo forest. It was as if there was an invisible rope pulling it towards Daoist Shentian. The person who rose up from the depths of the bamboo forest was Jiyu Fei. At this time, Jiyu Fei had already fainted. His body was covered in blood, and he looked extremely miserable. However, there was still a trace of his breath left. Reporting to the head of the sect, someone just tried to kill brother Jiyu Fei. They wanted to kill brother Jiyu Fei, the handsome young man, Ziyu, quickly replied respectfully. At this time, Taoist Shentian had already caught Jiyu Fei. He looked down and saw that Jiyu Fei's eyes were closed. His face was filled with pain, and there was a circle of wounds on his neck. The flesh on the wound was twisted, and blood was seeping out. Taoist Shentian was shocked and quickly looked closely. Fortunately, it was only a layer of flesh. The muscles, meridians, and blood vessels inside were not injured. Who the hell is it? Taoist Shentian, who rarely got angry, couldn't help but feel anger rise in his chest. His eyes shone several feet away. Swish, swish, swish. At this time, figures swayed in the air above the bamboo forest. One after another, 7 purple-robed old Taoists appeared. They had sensed the terrible Fa Li that had just exploded on Taishan Peak, so they had rushed over to see what had happened. Senior brother, this. The head of the 7 branches who had rushed over were shocked by what he saw. The bamboo forest was a mess, and Taoist Shentian was holding an unconscious Jiyu Fei. These 7 old Taoists had lived for hundreds of years. They had a wide range of knowledge, and their thoughts were meticulous. It was difficult for others to compare. They could be called old monsters. With a glance, how could they not know what had happened? How dare someone attack our disciple in our territory? How can we let this go? Purple Bamboo Peak's head, Long Hongxue, said fiercely. That person had dared to attack Jiyu Fei in the Taishan sect. This was no different from slapping the Taishan sect in the face. The 7 heads were already angry. Ziyu, describe that person's characteristics to the other martial granduncles. Taoist Xuantian's voice came down from the sky. Although his tone was calm, others could still hear a trace of gunpowder in it. Yes, head of the sect. Ziyu hurriedly bowed to the head of the 7 branches, who was standing in the sky, and then told them the characteristics of the black-clothed person. What? After a while, The heads of the 7 branches and Daoist Shen Tian were both shocked after listening to Ziyu's story. The identity of that mysterious person seemed to be senior brother. Could it really be someone from the Guangcheng celestial sect? Taoist Xuanfa's tone was a little hesitant. He was not sure, because if this matter involved the Guangcheng celestial sect, it would be very troublesome. Someone who can cultivate the fiery sword qi is not necessarily someone from the Guangcheng celestial sect. In this world, it is not only the Guangcheng celestial sect that cultivates the sword celestial technique, Taoist Shentian said after thinking for a while. A scroll that has sealed the power of a Dao technique, and it is a Dao technique that moves the universe and changes space. This kind of high-level Dao technique scroll is rare. Since the mysterious person who tried to kill Jiyu Fei dared to use the sword celestial technique, released the fiery sword qi, and then used the Dao technique scroll to escape, it was obvious that he was not afraid of the Taishen sect. No one knew if this mysterious person was deliberately trying to mislead them, or if he was plotting something. This matter needs to be discussed at length. We cannot be careless. If we do not handle it properly, it will cause a misunderstanding between us and the Guangcheng celestial sect. The consequences will be unimaginable. Taoist Xuanzang frowned. Junior brothers, there is no point in guessing here. You should go back first. Since that person was able to escape with a law technique scroll with the power of the law technique sealed in it, I'm afraid he has already planned everything. It is difficult for us to make any progress in this matter at the moment. I should take Jiyu Fei back to Taishen Peak and heal his injuries first. Taoist Shentian thought for a while and finally said this. Since that mysterious person had used a Dao technique scroll to escape, then it was absolutely impossible to catch up to him, nor was there any way to pursue him. Because no one knew which direction he had fled in. The 7 leaders bid farewell to Taoist Shentian and flew back to their own caves. But the medicine Daoist, the head of Spirit Bead Peak, was stopped by Taoist Shentian. Senior brother, is there something else? The medicine Daoist seemed surprised that his senior brother had stopped him. In fact, he was faking it. As expected, Taoist Shentian smiled. Junior brother medicine, do you really not know why I stopped you? Taoist Shentian looked at the medicine Daoist meaningfully. If I had known, I would not have come here. The medicine Daoist helplessly patted the cosmos bag on his waist. A red gourd flew out of the bag and landed in the medicine Daoist's hand. The medicine Daoist painfully pulled out the stopper of the gourd. A faint fragrance immediately floated out from the gourd. This fragrance made one feel refreshed and comfortable. Chapter 50. One of the 9 branches of the Taishen sect, the Spirit Bead Peak, was in charge of the immortal herb garden. It was the branch of the Taishen sect that was proficient in the way of alchemy. The amount of effort and energy required to start a cauldron was unimaginable. Most cultivators were not willing to spend too much time and energy on alchemy. This was because alchemy, in addition to expending a lot of effort and energy, it also required raw materials. Often, a cauldron of pills would require dozens or even hundreds of different kinds of spiritual herbs. The reason why spiritual herbs were called spiritual herbs was because they were rare. After all, these spiritual herbs were not like carrots. After 2 or 3 months, they would grow into a large field. The more precious a pill was, the rarer and more difficult it was to find the spiritual herbs needed. Often, when an alchemy master prepared to start a cauldron of pills, just collecting the spiritual herbs would take years, even decades, or even decades. The golden pill that the medicine Daoist poured out from the red gourd was the famous golden pill of 9 revolutions in the world of cultivation. To refine a cauldron of 9 transformations golden pills, just the preparation time alone would take up to 10 years. The number of spiritual herbs needed to be collected was as many as hundreds of types, and some of the spiritual herbs could even be called the spiritual essence of the world. Moreover, even if a cauldron of pills was successfully refined, it would be pitifully small. At most, there would be 7 or 8 pills. At the very least, there would only be 1 golden pill of 9 revolutions. The golden pill of 9 revolutions could restore flesh and bones from the dead. No matter how serious the injury, as long as one was still breathing, they would not die after taking the golden pill of 9 revolutions. For a cultivator, This was undoubtedly an extra life. With Ji Fei's current injury, if he did not take the golden pill of 9 revolutions, he would need to lie in bed for at least 10 days to gradually recover. However, the competition tomorrow would require Ji Fei's participation. Therefore, Daoist Shentian asked the medicine Daoist for a golden pill of 9 revolutions. Senior, I still have things to do. I will leave first. After the medicine Daoist put away the red gourd, he hurriedly bowed to Daoist Shentian and turned into a ray of light, as if he was escaping. Ziyu, come with me. Daoist Shentian put away the golden elixir of 9 transformations and carried Ji Fei toward Taishen Peak. Ziyu, who was on the ground, felt his body tighten. Then, he could not help but rise into the air, following behind Taoist Shentian. They flew through the air towards the towering Taishen Peak. In a secret room at the back of the Supreme Profound Hall, there was a praying mat in the center. On the praying mat sat a naked youth, and opposite the youth sat an old Daoist. There were 2 other white-clothed youths standing respectfully behind the old Taoist. One of them was handsome like jade and had an elegant demeanor. He was a beautiful youth, but his body seemed a little weak. The other youth's appearance was very ordinary, just like a farmer youth in the countryside. A person's appearance often did not mean anything. Of these 2 youths, one was weak, the other ordinary, but their backgrounds were not small. They were the 2 most outstanding disciples of the sect leader's generation. The graceful and beautiful young man was Ziyu, whereas the young man with an unprepossessing appearance that seemed to have dark red skin from being exposed to the sun and rain in the countryside was the eldest senior brother of the sect master's line, Li Lingfeng. And the old Daoist priest in the secret room was the sect leader of Taishen sect, Daoist Shentian. The youth who sat cross-legged in the middle of the secret room with his eyes closed, his expression pained and his body naked, was Ji Fei, who had been injured by the mysterious person. On Ji Fei's back, there was a deep purple fist print that had sunk into Ji Fei's body. Blue veins spread out from the center of the fist print, protruding from the skin on Ji Fei's back. It was a shocking sight. Ji Fei, who had bones of steel, had been heavily injured by the mysterious person's punch, even though he had used the magical power of refining his body to protect his back. This was the difference in strength, the difference between the awakening realm and the transcending mortality realm. The mysterious person's cultivation was a whole realm higher than Ji Fei's. If it were not for the fact that Ji Fei cultivated in a body refining technique that was famous for its strength, and that his body was much stronger than that of an ordinary martial cultivator, if it were not for the fact that Ji Fei had used the magical power of refining his body to counteract most of the power of the mysterious person's punch, Ji Fei would have really died under that person's fist. At this time, Ji Fei had already taken the golden elixir of 9 revolutions. The medicinal power of the golden elixir of 9 revolutions was extremely strong. Daoist Shentian sat in front of Ji Fei, his hands constantly forming seals, injecting magical power into Ji Fei's body, controlling and stimulating the medicinal power of the golden elixir of 9 revolutions, so that the effects of the golden elixir of 9 revolutions could be fully exerted. A huge amount of spiritual power surged through Ji Fei's body, and all his muscles, bones, and flesh were surging and trembling. Within his flesh and blood, not only was there a huge burst of spiritual power from the golden elixir of 9 revolutions, but there was also a trace of fire. It burned through Ji Fei's meridians, evaporated his blood, and burned his life. The medicinal power of the golden elixir of 9 revolutions was healing Ji Fei's injured body, but the threads of fire were like maggots in his bones, burning Ji Fei's flesh, bones, and tendons. The 2 extreme powers of regeneration and destruction were using Ji Fei's body as a battlefield. They collided with each other and cancelled each other out. This made it hard for Ji Fei. Every inch of his skin felt like it was being pierced by thousands of small knives. It was like he was being tortured by 1,000 cuts. The golden elixir of 9 revolutions went through 9 revolutions. When the powerful spiritual power from the golden elixir of 9 revolutions in Ji Fei's body reached 7 revolutions, Ji Fei's body began to violently tremble. Then, strands of hair-thin flames seeped out of his pores. What a sinister method! Daoist Shentian formed a seal, carefully drawing out the spiritual power in Ji Yufei's body. It was now a critical moment. The huge amount of spiritual power was gradually forcing out the flames in Ji Yufei's body. Daoist Xiantian never imagined that the person who had attacked Ji Yufei had buried a fatal killing blow in Ji Yufei's body. That mysterious person had actually injected the Daoist true fire into Ji Yufei's body, causing the Daoist true fire to hide inside Ji Yufei's body. At a certain time, it would explode from Ji Yufei's body, burning him to ashes. Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu, who were standing behind Daoist Xiantian, watched this scene in shock. To be able to survive a full-powered attack from a cultivator at the transcending mortality stage, the shock that Ji Yufei had brought them was a little hard to accept. As far as they were concerned, it was as easy as flipping one's hand for a cultivator at the transcending mortality stage to kill a cultivator at the awakening self stage. The miracle that appeared on Ji Yufei had shattered this fixed view of theirs. Was the cultivation method of the Green Spirit Peak really so powerful? At this time, Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu vaguely understood why the sect master valued this sole remaining disciple of the Green Spirit Peak so much. If such a heaven-defying disciple were to mature, what kind of scene would that be? This Ji Yufei was still young, but his potential was limitless. Just who would attack Ji Yufei? In the short period of time that the mysterious person had exchanged blows with Ji Yufei, he had already used such a sinister move. Clearly, he was determined to kill Ji Yufei. However, in front of a peerless expert at the 9th heavenly layer of the void controlling realm, this little trick naturally could not be hidden from their eyes. Daoist Xiantian did not directly use his great power to expel the Taoist true fire hidden in Ji Yufei's body. Instead, he sent streams of power into Ji Yufei's body to stimulate the medicinal power of the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir, using Ji Yufei's own power to expel the true fire in his body. At the 8 Revolutions Golden Elixir, the Taoist true fire in Ji Yufei's body had been completely forced out. The terrifying heat scorched the ground around Ji Yufei into scorched earth. The praying mat he was sitting on did not seem to be an ordinary item, for it could actually withstand the terrifying heat emitted by the Taoist true fire without being burned to ashes. Daoist Xuantian's great power formed streams of light outside of Ji Yufei's body, completely binding the powerful spiritual power that erupted from the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir within Ji Yufei's body, not allowing a single strand of it to spill out. Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu were both extremely envious. Ji Yufei actually had such a fortuitous encounter that the sect leader would personally treat Ji Yufei's injuries. The medicinal power of the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir would definitely cause Ji Yufei to be reborn. This time, Ji Yufei had really profited from a disaster. The power in the secret chamber was vast and mighty, and the yuan qi emitted from Ji Yufei's body also became more and more intense. His body, under the enormous spiritual power, rapidly recovered. The fist mark on his back gradually began to fade, and the blue veins also began to disappear on his back. And the barrier that Ji Yufei's cultivation seemed to have made some breakthroughs under the effect of this spiritual power. The spiritual power transformed from the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir was extremely pure, flawless, and full of vitality. It was precisely this power that caused Ji Yufei's stagnant cultivation base to once again advance. Ji Yufei's cultivation base was originally only a step away from the peak of the 7th heavenly layer. Now, he had finally taken this step. With his cultivation base at the peak of the 7th heavenly layer, even if he encountered an awakened 9th heavenly layer cultivator, he would still be able to put up a fight. On the path of cultivation, aside from unremitting effort, there was also a bit of opportunity. For example, if Ji Yufei hadn't been attacked this time, if Daoist Xiantian hadn't personally saved him, he wouldn't have been able to make a breakthrough under such circumstances. There was no doubt about the miraculous effects of the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir. When the sky was about to brighten and the stars began to recede from the sky, Ji Yufei finally completed the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir and completely refined the spiritual power transformed from the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir. The spiritual power merged with his own strength, and all his internal and external injuries were completely healed. The shocking fist mark on Ji Yufei's back had long since disappeared. Just as he was refining the enormous spiritual power of the 9 Revolutions Golden Elixir, All the muscles and bones in Ji Yufei's body immediately exploded, and a wave of air surged out from his body. Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu, who were standing behind Daoist Shentian, suddenly felt a strong wind blow against their faces, and they were extremely shocked. Ji Yufei's bronze-colored skin was shrouded in a layer of precious light, and there seemed to be streams of light swimming on his body. His iron body exuded a powerful and oppressive aura. The flesh and bones in his body had been cleansed by the enormous spiritual power of the 9 revolutions golden elixir 9 times, making Ji Yufei feel as if he had been reborn. His precious body had become even more powerful. The fluctuations of spiritual power in the secret room gradually subsided, and the fluctuations of Yuan Qi also gradually converged into Ji Yufei's body. Ji Yufei's eyelids moved, and then he opened his eyes. What was reflected in his eyes was the slight smile of Daoist Shentian, the head of the Taishan sect. Ji Yufei hurriedly turned around and bowed to Daoist Shentian. Ji Yufei greets the head of the sect. Many thanks to the head of the sect for saving my life. Although Ji Yufei had been sent flying by a punch from the mysterious person before Daoist Shentian had arrived, and then he had been strangled by the Li Fire Sword Qi on his neck, causing him to fall into a coma, the moment he woke up, he knew that it was Daoist Shentian who had saved him. Daoist Shentian stood up and said indifferently, "Get up." Then he said to Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu, "Take Ji Yufei to bathe and change his clothes, and then go directly to the square. It won't be long before the second round of the competition begins." "Yes." Head of the sect. Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu hurriedly responded in unison. Then, Ji Yufei, Li Lingfeng, and Zi Yu bowed to Daoist Shentian, and Ji Yufei, led by Li Lingfeng and Zi Yu, walked out of the secret room. There seems to be a secret on Ji Yufei's body. The Tai Chi symbol on his chest is very similar to the one that appeared on the night when the demon lord of 6 paths attacked. Could there be some connection between the two? Daoist Shentian sat down cross-legged on the praying mat again and began to ponder. When he was healing Ji Yufei, he had discovered the strangeness on Ji Yufei's chest. This shocked him, and question marks appeared in his mind. Chapter 51. Taishan Peak was the most beautiful and magnificent of the 9 peaks of Taishan. The peak was covered with green trees and exotic flowers, and grasses could be seen everywhere. Waterfalls and springs dotted the landscape, and celestial clouds lingered. It was a scene of immortals. On this morning, when the sky was about to brighten and the eastern horizon was bright and bright, a man emerged from a small pool below a waterfall at the back of the mountain with a hua-la sound. The man walked straight out of the pool, letting the water flow down his body. His bronze-colored body was slender and straight. His muscles were not very developed, but he gave off a feeling of power. It seemed that every muscle contained a terrible, explosive power. The perfect curves of his body could make all the girls in the world blush. He was this kind of person. A warrior who was cold, strong, and always maintained a heart of cultivation. He was Ji Yufei. Ji Yufei's appearance was not that breathtakingly handsome, nor did he have the charm that could make all the girls in the world fall head over heels for him. However, his face was well-defined, giving off a sense of determination and courage. He was a decisive person. Once he decided on something, he would not easily change his mind. For his enemies, he was a dangerous beast. No one knew what he would do in the next moment, because all his actions were in accordance with his heart. This was Ji Yufei, the last disciple of the Green Spirit Peak of Taishan sect. Among the 3 great Taoist sects, he was the only one who did not cultivate Taoist magic. He was a different kind of Taoist disciple. Brother Ji Yu. When Ji Yufei came out of the pool, an ordinary-looking disciple in white came up to Ji Yufei with a set of clean clothes and handed them to him. If other disciples saw this scene, they would definitely be shocked. Then, the gossip of Li Lingfeng helping Ji Yufei bathe and dress would definitely spread throughout the Taishan sect in the shortest time possible. The ordinary-looking disciple in white who came forward with the clothes was the eldest disciple of the younger generation of the 9 branches of Taishan, Li Lingfeng. "Thank you, senior." Ji Yufei took the clothes. At this time, the water stains on his body had already been evaporated into water vapor by his inner Yuan Qi and dissipated into the surrounding air. After seeing Ji Yufei put on his clothes, Li Lingfeng smilingly said, "It seems that junior brother's cultivation has improved again. I remember that junior brother's previous cultivation level seemed to be." When Ji Yufei heard this, he immediately felt a chill in his heart. Li Lingfeng's words had a hidden meaning. Ji Yufei immediately became vigilant. Without batting an eyelid, he said, "On the path of cultivation, opportunities are sometimes very important. I, your junior brother, was just a little lucky." As for Li Lingfeng's curiosity about his sudden increase in cultivation, Ji Yufei simply brushed it off without leaving a trace. Ji Yufei did not want anyone else to know about the secret of his great increase in cultivation, because if this secret were to be leaked, it would bring him endless troubles in the future. "Oh." Li Lingfeng looked at Ji Yufei with a strange look in his eyes. He said with some envy, "I don't have such luck as junior brother, haha." Ji Yufei laughed, then asked, "Where is senior brother Ziyu? Why don't I see him?" Ji Yufei immediately changed the topic, not wanting to talk more about cultivation with Li Lingfeng. "Junior brother Ziyu? He has already returned to his place of cultivation. Today's second round of competition is very important. He needs to prepare," said Li Lingfeng. After the first round of competition, out of the 81 outstanding disciples of the 9 branches who participated in the competition, 39 people were eliminated, and 42 people advanced to the second round of competition. These 42 young disciples of the Taishen sect who won represented the 42 young disciples with the most powerful cultivation level in the 9 branches of Taishen. No one was weak, and the weak had already been eliminated. Even a young expert like Ziyu did not dare to be careless. As disciples of the sect leader, the pressure they endured was much greater than the disciples of the other 8 branches. The disciples of the sect leader had to lead the group of disciples of the 9 branches. They were the role models for the disciples of the other 8 branches. Therefore, Li Lingfeng, Ziyu, and the others could not lose. Even if they lost, they had to lose brilliantly. "Chem. I want to cultivate my qi here for a while. I wonder if it's possible." Ji Yufei's cultivation had broken through to the peak of the 7th level of awakening. He wanted to feel out the situation in his body in order to better control the new power in his body. When Li Lingfeng heard this, his face did not show any expression. He only glanced around, then said, "Why not? However, you must not miss today's competition." "In that case, thank you, senior brother. When the competition begins, I will definitely be there on time." As Ji Yufei spoke, he walked to a large rock beside the pool, jumped up, and then sat cross-legged on the rock, closing his eyes to cultivate. When Li Lingfeng saw this, he shook his head and left this beautiful place to go to the Supreme Mystery Temple. In the rear hall of the Supreme Mystery Temple, where Daoist Shentian cultivated, Daoist Shentian sat quietly on a praying mat like a stone statue. There were no fluctuations coming from his body, as if he had really turned into a lifeless stone statue. No one could sense his existence. Daoist Shentian seemed to have become one with the world. His Tao was profound, and he was one with the world. His spiritual power was endless. This was the terror of a cultivator at the 9th level of Imperial Void. He was only a step away from attaining the position of a half-god and enjoying an immortal lifespan. This was the immortal god realm that every single cultivator that comprehended the Grand Tao and pursued immortality dreamt of. Unfortunately, this one step separated immortals from mortals. It was this one step that had shackled Daoist Shentian for hundreds of years. The demigod realm was like an unattainable fruit. He could only smell the fragrance of the fruit, but he could not pluck it. Longevity grass, 200 years of lifespan. I can't miss this chance. Suddenly, Daoist Shentian opened his eyes, and a bright light flashed through them. At this time, a series of light footsteps came from the distance and stopped outside the door. "Come in." With Daoist Xuantian's powerful divine sense, the scene outside the door was immediately reflected in his mind. It was even clearer than when he saw it with his eyes. The stone door was pushed open from the outside and a white-robed youth walked in. The white-robed youth closed the stone door and respectfully walked in front of Daoist Shentian. Did you send off that Ji Yufei?" Daoist Shentian asked indifferently. He didn't even look at the ordinary-looking youth in front of him. This youth was Li Lingfeng, who had come back to report. He quickly said, "Ancestor, junior brother Jiu Fei is still in the back mountain, preparing for today's competition."
Oh.
Daoist Shentian was a bit surprised. The people of Green Spirit Peak were all cultivation maniacs. This was not bad. They didn't miss any time to cultivate. Very good. Daoist Shentian nodded to himself. "You can leave," Daoist Shentian said. "Yes." Li Lingfeng respectfully took a few steps back, then turned to the stone door, opened it, and walked out. The cultivation place of the ancestor was not a place that just anyone could enter. Without Daoist Xuantian's orders, no one in the Taishan sect dared to come here, not even the heads of the 7 branches. What secrets does Green Spirit Peak have that I don't know? Is the Tai Chi symbol on Jiu Fei's chest a coincidence or? Daoist Shentian slowly closed his eyes and turned back into a statue. He sat quietly on the praying mat, motionless and silent. The sun rose from the east, dispelling the darkness that shrouded the world. Light shone on the earth. A figure stood at the top of Shaoyang Peak, facing the rising sun. His stomach expanded and contracted, and 2 flickering flames came out of his nostrils. The power of fire in the world, especially the first wisp of true fire that came from the rising sun, was sucked into the nose of the old Daoist. This old Daoist was the head of the Shaoyang Peak, Daoist Chao Yang. Daoist Chao Yang cultivated in fire elemental Dao techniques. He was absorbing the true fire of the sun to nourish the fire elemental power in his body. With the 9 revolutions of qi, Taoist Zhaoyang's nostrils sucked in the 2 streams of crimson qi into his body. His entire body was immediately covered with a layer of faint fire, emitting a terrifyingly high temperature, causing the space around him to distort. Where Daoist Chao Yang stood, there was not a single blade of grass within 100 feet of him. All that was left was a scorched and cracked stone. It seemed that he often absorbed the sun's fire here, so much so that the ground within 100 feet around him was scorched. After finishing his cultivation, Daoist Chao Yang's figure suddenly disappeared from the top of the mountain. Not only the old Daoist on Shaoyang Peak, but all the disciples of Taishan sect who cultivated in fire elemental Dao techniques were standing high up, facing the sun, breathing in and out. They were all doing the same thing, and that was to absorb the first wisp of pure sunlight that shone into the world when the sun rose. When the sun rose in the morning, the first ray of sunlight was the first wisp of sun essence that the sun emitted throughout the day. It was the purest true fire of the sun. Then, the sun emitted a dazzling light that illuminated the world. The pure true fire of the sun gradually faded until it finally disappeared. Clang! Soon, a melodious bell sound rang throughout the 9 peaks of Taishan. It came from Taishan Peak, which was surrounded by the 8 peaks. It echoed throughout Taishan Mountain for a long time. This sound seemed to penetrate through Taishan Mountain and spread to every corner of the huge Taishan Mountain for hundreds of miles. It completely broke the peace of Taishan Mountain. After the bell rang, on the other 8 peaks that surrounded Taishan Peak, white-robed disciples or green-robed disciples appeared one after another. The disciples of Taishan sect who were cultivating on the 9 peaks of Taishan all came out from their cultivation places. Whether they wanted to or not, when they heard the bell, they all had to go to Taishan Peak in the middle. Even those who were in a deep state of meditation were awakened by the sound of the bell without exception. The disciples of the 9 branches gathered outside Taishan Temple on Taishan Peak. The 9 major arenas stood on the square, and the heads of the 7 branches and Shentian Taoist sat high up in front of the temple. Chapter 52. The second round of competition was much more intense than the first round yesterday. 42 disciples were able to win in yesterday's competition, so they must have had something special about them. Either they were better at Taoist techniques, or they had powerful magical treasures that made it difficult for them to fight. But no matter if they won with Taoist techniques or magical treasures, no one had any objections. Victory was victory, defeat was defeat. This was the cruel rule of the strong. After the lots were drawn, the second round of competition began under the direction of the Xuanfa Taoist. The 9 arenas in the square were immediately filled with excitement. All kinds of Dao techniques emerged one after another, and the powerful pressure that emanated from the magical treasures was frightening. On the 9 arenas, 42 of the most outstanding youths from the 9 branches showed off their skills and fought with all their might. Even if they did not go too far, it was inevitable that one side would be injured. But if it was not life-threatening, or if the opponent was deliberately injured, the sect would not pursue the matter. The heads of the 7 branches and the sect leader sat in front of the Supreme Mystery Hall. No one dared to act presumptuously in front of them. Therefore, the 9 Peaks trials were carried out in an orderly manner without any disputes. It seemed that not many people knew that Gu Fei had been attacked last night, nor did it spread within the sect. Perhaps the sect leader and the heads of the 7 branches had suppressed the matter. The 9 Peaks trials continued as usual, as if nothing had happened. This surprised Gu Fei. The reaction of the sect leader and the heads of the 7 branches seemed to be a bit unusual. The Taishen sect was one of the 3 main sects, a famous sect in the world of cultivators. To have a disciple attacked in the sect was no small matter, but the sect did not seem to have done anything about it. Whatever happens, it is not something I can control. Let's win the 9 Peaks trials first. At this moment, the outcome of the battle between the 2 youths on the first ring had been decided, and it was Gu Fei's turn to enter the ring. Lei Ao, an outstanding disciple of the Biyun Peak, seems to be Dongfang Chen's senior brother. Interesting. Gu Fei stepped onto the stage and was greeted by a tall youth with long arms and legs. He looked very mighty. The 2 walked to a distance of 6 feet from each other and stood still. Lei Ao had the head of a leopard, the eyes of a tiger, the waist of a bear, and the appearance of a mighty man. It could be said that he was naturally gifted. Lei Ao stood in front of Gu Fei and a ferocious beast-like aura immediately swept towards Gu Fei. Gu Fei's pupils involuntarily shrank. This Lei Ao is not simple. Gu Fei felt that Biyun Peak's Lei Ao's cultivation was not inferior to Dongfang Chen's. He was a strong opponent. Humph. Gu Fei, you went too far yesterday. Today, I will return the humiliation that Dongfang Chen suffered to you. Lei Ao pointed at Gu Fei with an ominous glint in his eyes and said ruthlessly, "Senior brother Lei, why are you still talking so much with this arrogant guy? Just beat him up and help us vent our anger." The Biyun Peak disciples below the stage all clamored. Not a single one of them did not glare at Gu Fei angrily. It seemed like they were going to attack Gu Fei as a group. Yesterday, on the arena, Gu Fei's humiliation of Dongfang Chen had greatly angered all the disciples of the Biyun Peak and made them lose face. It would be strange if these disciples were not angry. As for Dongfang Chen, below the arena, he was gnashing his teeth at Gu Fei. He could not wait to jump onto the arena and chop Gu Fei into pieces to vent his anger. Yesterday, Gu Fei made him lose face in front of the disciples of the 9 factions. It could be said that he had formed an irreconcilable grudge with Gu Fei. Although Dongfang Chen had suffered serious internal injuries yesterday, after a night of treatment by the experts of the sect and the consumption of elixirs, his injuries seemed to have completely healed. The methods of cultivators were extremely mysterious. For those with great power, even moving mountains and draining seas was a piece of cake. It was very easy to heal a mere internal injury. Last night, Gu Fei was attacked by a cultivator of the transcending mortality stage. His body was hit by the Taoist true fire, which burned his meridians and meridians. His injuries were unimaginably serious, but he was still healed by Taoist Xuantian's 9 revolution golden pill. What a joke. Even Dongfang Chen is not my opponent. You should just admit defeat. Gu Fei said disdainfully. Lei Ao's cultivation seemed to be on par with Dongfang Chen's, but he still wanted to help Dongfang Chen vent his anger. Wasn't he looking for trouble? Damn it. Today, I will let you experience my power. Lei Ao was instantly enraged when he heard Sumo's words. Veins appeared on his forehead. Then prepare to be tortured. Gu Fei's expression turned cold and a ray of light shot out from his eyes. Then, he left an afterimage on his original spot and appeared in front of Lei Ao in an instant. Lei Ao did not expect Gu Fei's speed to be so fast and he was instantly shocked. However, he was after all, a rare young expert among the young disciples of Biyun Peak. When Gu Fei moved, He let out a low roar and a violent wave of spiritual power surged out of his body. There was a series of crackling sounds around his body and sparks flew everywhere. His body was actually covered with a layer of dazzling lightning that was as thick as a child's arm, protecting him inside. When Jiyu Fei approached Lei Ao with his extreme speed, he had already attacked. A fist had already landed on Lei Ao's abdomen and the fist had even touched Lei Ao's clothes. However, Lei Ao's spiritual power had already erupted from his body like a volcano. It was a layer of red lightning net that carried a shocking fire elemental power. 5 Thunder's execution. Jiyu Fei's fist instantly collided with the protective lightning that surged out of Lei Ao's body and gave out a low thunder-like sound. Then, Jiyu Fei quickly retreated. His entire arm was already covered with red lightning. It was that punch that caused Lei Ao's protective lightning to attack Jiyu Fei's arm. It caused his entire right arm to feel numb. What a powerful lightning power! It is many times more powerful than the palm thunder. When the red lightning attacked his arm, Jiyu Fei's right sleeve was immediately burnt into ashes. Roar! With an angry roar, Jiyu Fei shook his right arm and used a strong force to disperse the red lightning on his arm. Then, he stopped his retreating body and stared coldly at Lei Ao, who was still retreating. Jiyu Fei's fist was extremely powerful. Although the fist did not really hit Lei Ao's body, the strong force of the fist still caused Lei Ao to suffer a great impact. His body was unsteady as he retreated continuously. Every time he took a step back, Lei Ao's heavy and ferocious steps caused the arena beneath his feet to tremble. He retreated continuously for more than 10 steps before he could dissolve the force of Jiyu Fei's fist. Warriors are indeed scary. Every move they make is filled with great force. In terms of body strength, I am not as good as Jiyu Fei. Lei Ao was secretly shocked. With a lightning-fast exchange of blows, he had already determined how strong Jiyu Fei was. 5 Thunder's technique, Eastern would thunder appear. Lei Ao pinched a thunder seal with both of his hands. The red lightning on his body that was crackling continuously immediately turned into a dark green color. Then, it rushed out from Lei Ao's body and formed more than 10 green lightning arcs that struck towards Jiyu Fei. The strong force of the thunder contained a wave of plant essence qi. The wood elemental power in the air also gathered from all directions and merged with the lightning, causing the tens of green lightning arcs to explode with even more blinding light. Among all the Taoist skills, the most powerful one was the thunder skill. Thunder was the command of heaven and it represented heaven to punish. Once the thunder was out, everything in the world would tremble. And the thunder skill that Lei Ao cultivated was the authentic 5 Thunders technique. Even though the thunder had not formed a core of Tao and had broken through to the realm of transcending mortality, the power of the thunder that he displayed was not to be underestimated. Feeling the oppressive aura that was filled with destruction from Lei Ao, Jiyu Fei could not help but frown. But at this moment, the tens of green lightning arcs had already struck in front of him and he did not dare to be careless. His right hand grabbed the air in front of him and a purple light instantly rushed out from his palm. With a clang sound, a purple lightning that looked like a sword but was not a sword immediately condensed and was caught in his hand. Jiyu Fei waved the 3 feet purple lightning that looked like a sword but was not a sword. Instantly, there was a kai-kai sound. Rays of purple sword qi broke through the air and slashed towards the tens of green lightning arcs at lightning speed. There was a series of loud noises as the sword qi and lightning collided with each other. But Jiyu Fei's body followed the sword and his aura was imposing. When he destroyed the lightning arcs, he took big steps towards Lei Ao. Jiyu Fei used the desolate steps. It looked slow but it was actually very fast. Lei Ao saw Jiyu Fei turning into a flowing shadow and pouncing towards him and he was instantly shocked. Although he was tall and strong and his Taoist techniques were powerful, his martial arts were very ordinary. He did not dare to let a martial artist like Jiyu Fei get close to him. Lightning doppelganger, Lei Ao shouted and there was a loud sound of thunder in the arena. At the same time, his body suddenly became blurry. Jiyu Fei's heavy punch directly penetrated through Lei Ao's chest. Just when everyone was shocked, Lei Ao's figure had already appeared behind Jiyu Fei. Illusion. Ji Yufei's face was expressionless as he dispersed Lei Ao's after-image doppelganger with one punch. He was not surprised at all. Lei Ao's doppelganger technique was much inferior to the doppelganger technique that the person from last night had used. 5 Thunders execution, South Fire Thunder appear, Central Earth Thunder rise. Lei Ao's hands instantly formed 2 Taoist seals. On the arena, there was instantly an explosion of 2 violent forces. Then, kaboom! A large ball of fire exploded in the air above Ji Yufei's head. It shot out streaks of lightning that were like fire snakes and formed a fire net that covered Ji Yufei's head. At the same time, a thick earth energy suddenly rose under Ji Yufei's feet. The earth energy was not a patch of grayness. Instead, under Lei Ao's Taoist technique, it had condensed into streaks of grayish lightning, which coiled around Ji Yufei's body with crackling sounds. 5 Thunders execution used the power of the 5 elements to condense the power of lightning and used it to attack the enemy. The violent power of lightning tore the air apart and attacked from above and below. It completely sealed all of Ji Yufei's escape routes. Chapter 53. It could not be denied that the 5 Thunders technique of Lei Ao, the outstanding disciple of Biyun Peak, was truly amazing. Lightning as thick as a finger crackled and instantly enveloped Ji Yufei. Using a technique to attract the thunder and fire in the air and extract the thunder and lightning from the ground, Lei Ao seemed to have really used a great power to attract the fire thunder from the south and extract the earth thunder from the ground, causing the sky to lose its color. More than half of the arena was covered by the power of thunder and lightning. It was difficult for Ji Yufei to dodge, and there was no place for him to dodge. A cold laugh came from within the net of thunder and fire. Under the shocked gazes of the audience, Ji Yufei did not dodge at all. He directly let the fire thunder that fell from above and the earth thunder that rose from the ground attack his body. The crowd of Taishan sect disciples watching the battle immediately cried out. This was simply too crazy. Did Ji Yufei really dare to use his flesh and blood to block the power of thunder and lightning? The 5 Thunders technique was an authentic heavenly thunder technique. Using a spell with one's hand and activating one's spiritual power, one could draw out the true power of thunder and lightning. The power of thunder and lightning was a violent and destructive force in the world. If an ordinary person was struck by it, they would definitely be burnt to a crisp in an instant. It was extremely terrifying. In the eyes of the spectators, this action of Ji Yufei was no different from seeking death. What? The power of thunder and lightning engulfed Ji Yufei in an instant. The powerful electricity invaded his flesh and mercilessly ravaged his sensitive nerves. The violent power passed through his muscles, bones, and flesh, causing him to howl in pain. Seeing this scene, Lei Ao could not help but be shocked. He could not believe what he was seeing. His opponent, Ji Yufei, did not even try to block it. Instead, he directly used his body to block the power of thunder and lightning. Was he crazy? Oh no. This guy is looking for death. He can't blame me. But if he dies by my hand, I will also be unlucky. After a moment of shock, Lei Ao could not help but be shocked. The arena battles of the 9 Peaks trials did not determine life and death, only victory and defeat. It was understandable if one accidentally injured someone, but if one were to kill someone, then regardless of right or wrong, one would not be able to escape punishment. As Lei Ao thought of this, he hurriedly withdrew his lightning technique. However, at this moment, Ji Yufei's voice was heard from the dazzling lightning ball on the arena. Good. Aya. 5 Thunders execution. Not bad. Aya. What a pity. It's not strong enough. Trapped in the pincer attack of the Southern Fire Thunder and the Central Earth Thunder, although Ji Yufei was screaming in pain, he was still able to speak, which was inconceivable to everyone. You actually said that my lightning technique isn't strong enough? Lei Ao, who was about to withdraw his Taoist technique, suddenly paused. His face was immediately covered with a layer of frost. He gritted his teeth and said fiercely, "All right, I will risk the sect's punishment to hack you to death, you arrogant brat." As he spoke, Lei Ao chanted and his hands formed the 5 Thunders execution technique. As the mysterious hand seals were formed one by one, the sky above the arena suddenly darkened and there were signs of the weather changing. following which, an earth-shaking explosion sounded from all four directions at the same time. Endless lightning appeared in the sky and rays of golden light danced in the air. They all struck towards Jiu Fei, who was on the arena. When the spectators below the stage saw the might of the heavens and earth, they immediately cried out in alarm and retreated. They didn't want to be the fish in the pond. The power of thunder and lightning wasn't a joke. If they were struck by the electricity that shot out from the stage, although they wouldn't die, they would inevitably be injured. Rumble. For a moment, the sky above the first arena was filled with the sound of thunder. The entire arena shook violently. If it wasn't for the fact that the arena itself was protected by magic power, it would have collapsed long ago. Everyone's gaze was attracted to the arena. Everyone was shocked. Lei Ao was really ruthless. He actually used the 5 thunders at the same time. It was obvious that he wanted to teach Jiu Fei a lesson and did not give him any leeway. The 5 thunders moved around the arena and intertwined to form a huge thunder ball. It trapped Jiu Fei inside and bombarded him indiscriminately. It was a shocking sight. The dazzling light from the thunder made it hard for everyone to look directly at it. Jiu Fei's furious roars could be heard from within the thunderball. However, his roars of pain did not weaken at all. Even the thunderclaps seemed to be able to drown out his roars. The scene was extremely shocking. In front of the Supreme Mystery Hall, Daoist Shentian, who was sitting on the throne, could not help but frown slightly. His gaze was like lightning, piercing through the void. He could clearly see the crazed Jiu Fei trapped in the 5-colored thunderball. Tens of thousands of lightning bolts coiled around Jiu Fei's body, passing through his entire body, inside and out, swimming in his muscles, bones, blood, and flesh. The unparalleled power of lightning penetrated through his eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and the 7 apertures of his body. He seemed to have turned into a god of lightning that emitted dazzling bolts of lightning from all over his body, becoming a spirit amidst the lightning. Good boy, he is actually using the power of the 5 elements to refine his body. How audacious! When Daoist Xuantian's powerful divine sense swept over Jiu Fei's body in the 5-colored thunderball, he immediately discovered the strangeness of Jiu Fei's body. At this time, the other 7 chiefs also revealed a trace of surprise. They had clearly also discovered the strangeness of Jiu Fei. It turned out that the reason why Jiu Fei did not resist the thunder technique that Lei Ao had used was to refine his body. He was confident that with his strong body of the 7th heaven, it was enough to withstand the power of lightning released by a young expert like Lei Ao. Surrounded by thousands of lightning bolts, Jiu Fei roared continuously and cried miserably. The sound that came from his throat shook the entire Guangqing, causing the spectators to be inexplicably frightened. It was said that when the peak cultivators on the mainland broke through the void and ascended to the heaven realm, a great tribulation would descend. This tribulation of ascension was the heavenly lightning tribulation. Those who ascended had to undergo the baptism of the heavenly lightning tribulation and completely refine all the elements in the mortal world so that their power would completely transform into the purest celestial spirit power. Their bodies would also be refined into the celestial spirit body. Only then could they successfully ascend. As for Jiu Fei, he was now following the example of those peak cultivators, undergoing the baptism of lightning and borrowing the power of lightning to refine his body, taking the crucial step towards the indestructible treasure body. This action of Jiu Fei was undoubtedly audacious and completely exceeded the scope of everyone's understanding. It could be said to be an extremely frightening and dangerous action. If Jiu Fei could not withstand the power of the 5 thunders true technique, he would be blasted into charcoal by the terrifying lightning that was filled with a destructive aura. However, from the looks of it, he seemed to have successfully withstood the bombardment of thunder and lightning. His 5 elemental natal essence qi became purer and purer under the refinement of the lightning bolts that passed through his flesh and bones. The impurities in his body were refined and washed away. Looking inside, Jiu Fei realized that all the bones in his body had become as clear as jade, emitting a faint brilliance, as if they were made of refined iron. The strength of his bones was already comparable to refined iron. His desperate action had increased his cultivation by quite a bit. The changes in his bones meant that he had already entered the stage of changing his bones. The peak of the seventh heaven of awakened realm was the great success of changing marrow and changing blood. If he were to break through to the eighth heaven of awakened realm, it would be changing his bones, and all the bones in his body would start to transform. Chapter 54. Monster. This guy. How is it possible? Thunderclaps shook the heavens. 5-colored lightning shot out from the first arena in a frenzy. The destructive power of the lightning caused the heaven and earth to tremble. However, the white-clothed youth who had unleashed such a shocking lightning technique on the arena felt as if his heart had fallen into an ice cave. His entire body was ice-cold. Lei Ao, the only disciple of Biyun Peak who practiced the Five Thunders Righteous Tao technique and Dongfang Chen Sr., was now pale. He looked at the huge lightning ball that was formed by the interweaving power of the 5 elements of lightning in front of him in fear. His body trembled slightly. He could not believe his own eyes. A person of similar age to him could actually use his flesh and blood to resist his lightning technique. It was too unbelievable. Feeling the aura in the lightning ball that was gradually getting stronger, Lei Ao could not help but doubt the power of the lightning that he released. He no longer had the confidence he had before. Even a huge rock would be turned into dust after being struck by lightning for half an hour. Could it be that Ji Yufei's body was actually tougher than a huge rock? Not only was Lei Ao shocked, but the people who were watching the battle below the challenge ring were also shocked. The scene that they saw had already been deeply imprinted in the hearts of the young disciples. They believed that they would remember this unbelievable scene for the rest of their lives. Zhao Ziru's heart was already in her throat. She stared nervously at the blurry figure in the lightning ball. Even her breathing seemed to have stopped. She was worried about Ji Yufei. In her opinion, no one would dare to use their body to withstand the power of heavenly thunder. As far as she knew, the Taishan sect's 5 Thunders Righteous Way drew upon the true thunder and lightning of heaven and earth. Its power was vast and could intimidate all things. With Lei Ao's cultivation, although the power of the lightning that he triggered was many times weaker than the real lightning, it was still not something that cultivators of the same level as him could resist. This action of Ji Yufei had really shocked her. Luckily, Ji Yufei seemed to be able to use his flesh and blood to resist the power of the 5 Thunders. This made Zhao Ziru feel more at ease. This Ji Yufei, he is still not dead. The heavens are really blind. Wang Yuanji, who was watching the battle from the crowd below the stage, couldn't help feeling disappointed when he saw that Lei Ao was unable to summon a thunderbolt to kill Ji Yufei. Wang Yuanji, a narrow-minded disciple of an aristocratic family, was taught a lesson by Ji Yufei and robbed of his life-saving spirit talisman. Wang Yuanji wished he could grind Ji Yufei's bones to ashes. However, he was not strong enough and did not dare to find Ji Yufei for revenge. Thus, he hoped that Ji Yufei would die in the hands of others. Seeing his enemy in trouble, of course, he was extremely happy. However, it was a pity that his happiness came too early. Not only did Ji Yufei not die from the lightning, he was also using the power of the lightning to train his body and make a breakthrough in his cultivation. The extremely crazy training of the body brought about endless pain. The power of the lightning shook his soul and almost shook Ji Yufei's 3 souls and 7 spirits out of his body. However, he gritted his teeth and endured it. However, he still let out a heart-wrenching scream from time to time, which made one's scalp go numb. The fierce power of the lightning passed through his body, causing him extreme pain. However, it also stimulated the potential of his body bit by bit. Where there is gain, there is loss, and where there is loss, there is gain. Enduring the endless pain brought about a sublimation of his power and body, and an increase in his cultivation. As for Lei Ao, he did not believe it and tried his best to gather the mana in his body. Using his mana as a guide, he moved the power of the lightning from all directions and crazily struck towards Ji Yufei. Streaks of silver snakes rampaged in the air, causing the arena to be filled with a thick aura of destruction. Lei Ao's eyes were already red. He no longer cared about Ji Yufei's life and death. His eyes were filled with endless killing intent, and his black hair danced wildly, as if he was crazy. Lei Ao's body emitted an unprecedented strong fluctuation of mana. He wanted to destroy this crazy young man in front of him, who made him tremble with fear. Daoist Shen and the 7 branch heads, who were sitting on the steps in front of the Supreme Mystery Hall, shook their heads inwardly. You're desperately using the 5 Thunder Righteous Tao technique, not to hurt the enemy, but to help them raise their cultivation. Of course, there were not many people present who could see the difference. They were all amazed by the power and dominance of the Green Spirit Peak's body training technique. It could actually train one's body to the point where it was not afraid of lightning. However, no one would have thought that Ji Fei was actually using Lei Ao's power to train his flesh and bones to break through the bottleneck of his cultivation. The head of the Biyun Peak, Daoist Shen Fa, who was sitting beside Daoist Shen Tian, had an ugly expression on his face. Seeing his own disciples doing their best to refine the opponent's body made him feel like he was going to go crazy. The chiefs of the other branches were watching this scene with great interest. They didn't even look at the matches that were going on in the other arenas. Ji Fei, who was trapped in the 5 lightning ball, suddenly roared towards the sky. 2 rays of divine light, which were a few feet long, shot out from his eyes. His long black hair stood up, and every strand of his hair seemed to be surrounded by lightning. Every inch of his skin seemed to have electricity flowing. He was like a demon god. His body shook violently, and a majestic force exploded from his body. It was like a monstrous wave sweeping across the heaven and earth, and it forced the lightning flowing on his body away. Inside Ji Fei's body, there was a series of crackling sounds. The 84,000 pores on his body emitted needle-like rays of light at the same time. There were sizzling sounds, and a crystalline light flowed on his skin. At this moment, Ji Fei could clearly feel the tiny rays of light formed from the essence of qi flowing happily through his flesh and bones. It was like a stream of water, flowing over and over again. He felt that his body was filled with an inexhaustible amount of power. It was as if he could shatter the heavens with a raise of his hand, and crack the earth with a single step. 8th Heavenly Layer. I've finally broken through the bottleneck of cultivation and entered the 8th Heavenly Layer of the Awakening Realm. Ji Fei laughed to the sky. His laughter was filled with joy. A strong power was emitted from his body, which seemed to be made of steel. Not only did it cause Lei Ao, who was still using the thunder technique to attack Ji Fei crazily, to be shocked, even the younger generation disciples who were watching the battle below the stage felt a strong pressure, and their expressions changed. The lightning that Lei Ao shot out had already been blocked by the power that surged out from Ji Fei's body. The power of the lightning and the might of the thunder could no longer do anything to him. Ji Fei laughed coldly. Both of his hands directly reached into the densely packed lightning that was swimming around in front of him. Then, his hands separated, and he actually tore apart the lightning net that was enveloping him. Then, the endless power of the lightning was actually absorbed into his hands. The next moment, he waved his hands, and the lightning that was caught in his hands was thrown towards Lei Ao like a spear. Lightning shield. Lei Ao was shocked. He immediately formed a seal with both of his hands, and a light shield that was formed from the interweaving of lightning appeared in front of him. Boom! A loud sound was heard. The lightning that was thrown by Ji Fei instantly collided with the lightning shield. At the same time, there was a loud sound, and at the same time, there was a glaring strong light. The strong light was so glaring that it was painful. The disciples who were watching the battle below the stage were temporarily blinded in that instant, and they all exclaimed in shock. The lightning shield that was protecting Lei Ao disappeared at the same time as the lightning that struck him. Lei Ao, on the other hand, felt as if he was hit by a heavy hammer. His body shook violently, and he took a few steps back. Swoosh! Ji Fei's body moved, and in an instant, he was in front of Lei Ao. Lei Ao was shocked, and he wanted to use the Tao formula. However, Ji Fei did not give him the chance to do so, and Ji Fei had already landed a heavy punch on his abdomen. Wa! Lei Ao cried out miserably. His tall body instantly curled up like a prawn in pain. In that instant, he only felt that all the bones in his body were shattered by the punch, and all the meridians in his body were about to break. This kind of pain was simply unbearable. Chapter 55. Ji Fei had defeated Lei Ao so easily. When Lei Ao's body fell heavily on the arena, The crowd was still in disbelief and they stared at the scene with their mouths agape. The younger disciples of Taishan sect all gasped. Originally, Lei Ao had the ability to compete with Ji Fei. How was it that in just a short hour, Lei Ao could not even withstand a single blow from Ji Fei? Amongst the younger generation, no one understood what was happening. All of them scratched their heads in confusion as they looked at Ji Fei, who was leaping down from the stage, with fear in their eyes. The younger disciples had long heard that the disciples of Ling Peak were different in Taishan sect. It was indeed not groundless. There was no fluctuation of spiritual power, and he did not use any Taoist techniques, but he had defeated the two outstanding disciples of Biyun Peak. It was really frightening. The path of martial arts had long declined in the cultivation world of Tenglong continent. The profound meaning of martial arts had long been lost in the long river of time. Although there were still many martial artists in the secular world, those martial artists who walked in the pugilistic world were like ants in front of martial cultivators. They were simply not worth mentioning. No one understood the profound meaning of martial arts, and no one had seen real martial arts techniques. Therefore, the younger disciples were all in awe of Ji Fei. It was because they did not understand the path of martial arts that they were in awe of him. It was because they were ignorant that they were afraid. Humans tend to hold an attitude of reverence towards the unknown. Ji Fei did not care about the looks of others. After jumping off the arena, he walked out. The people in front of him quickly moved to the sides and made a path for him. At this time, a few disciples of Biyun Peak had already jumped onto the arena and carried Lei Ao, who was unconscious, off the arena. Below the arena, Taoist Danyang's face was so gloomy that it was scary. He looked at the back of Ji Fei, and a light flashed in his eyes. At the same time, Ji Fei seemed to have sensed Taoist Danyang's gaze. He suddenly stopped and turned around. His eyes shone brightly as he glanced at the people behind him. All the younger generation disciples who were swept by his gaze were intimidated by the ominous glint in Ji Fei's eyes. Their bodies turned cold as if they were being stared at by a ferocious beast, causing their hearts to palpitate. Finally, Ji Fei's gaze fell on Daoist Scarlet Sunday. However, at this moment, Daoist Scarlet Sun had already retracted his gaze from Ji Fei and bent down to examine the unconscious Lei Ao, who was carried to the front by a group of disciples. I felt a dangerous aura coming from behind me just now. Could it be him? Ji Fei turned around thoughtfully and continued to walk out of the square. The breakthrough in his realm had also strengthened his spiritual senses. When Daoist Scarlet Sun revealed his hostility towards him, his sharp spiritual senses immediately captured the abnormality coming from behind him. However, Daoist Scarlet Sun was a cultivator at the transcending mortality stage after all. Although Ji Fei felt that something was amiss, he couldn't be sure who was behind him. In that instant, he felt a sense of danger. He had just broken through to the 8th heaven of awakening realm. He needed to calm down and comprehend for a while to consolidate and stabilize his 8th heaven of awakening realm. Therefore, he walked out of the square and sat cross-legged under a big tree at the side of the square. He closed his eyes and meditated. However, he did not dare to completely immerse himself in deep cultivation. Instead, he released a trace of his divine sense to observe the situation around him. Although no one dared to harm him under the eyes of the sect leader, Daoist Shentian, it was good to be careful. When Ji Fei came down from the arena, Zhao Ziru had wanted to go up to him. However, it was her turn to go up, so she had no choice but to jump onto the 8th arena. On the square, there were 9 arenas. On the other 8 arenas, 8 pairs of young disciples were already locked in a stalemate. Waves of powerful spiritual power rippled out and cheers rose and fell. The second round of the competition had already reached its climax. Among the 42 disciples, other than a few who possessed overwhelming strength, the rest of them were about the same level, with not much difference between them. On the 8th arena, Zhao Ziru, a disciple of the Purple Bamboo Peak, fought against Ziyu, a disciple of the Taishan Peak. Because Ziyu, an outstanding disciple from the sect leader's faction, had participated in this competition, it attracted the attention of many disciples from the other factions. Ziyu, an elegant and beautiful young man, had a handsome face that made even women feel ashamed of their inferiority. He could be said to be a perfect young man, but the frailty that seeped out of him caused him to lack the masculinity that a man should have. This was one of Ziyu's flaws. He was a handsome man that was as weak as a woman. If he changed into women's clothes, he would definitely be a great beauty that could cause the downfall of nations. No one would be able to tell that he was actually a man. When the black tortoise seal appeared, the 8th arena was instantly filled with water vapor. An oppressive aura surged out, and the power of the water element swept towards Ziyu like a surging wave. Facing the outstanding disciple from the sect leader's faction, Zhao Ziru immediately took out the precious treasure of Purple Bamboo Peak. This was because Ziyu's cultivation was much higher than hers. Zhao Ziru's cultivation was at the peak of the 6th heavenly layer, while Ziyu's cultivation, although he did not use his full strength in yesterday's competition, a conservative estimate would definitely be around the peak of the 7th heavenly layer, or even had already broken into the 8th heavenly layer. In yesterday's second round, Zhao Ziru had lost to Song Ruochen, a disciple of the sky-piercing peak. Song Ruochen's cultivation was at the peak of the awakened 7th heaven. Although Song Ruochen had won through trickery, it was enough to show that a cultivator at the 7th heaven still had an overwhelming advantage against a cultivator at the 6th heaven who wielded a precious treasure. After a night of rest, Zhao Ziru was full of energy. The power she displayed when she activated the black tortoise seal could not be compared to before. The black tortoise seal quickly enlarged, becoming the size of a small mountain as it smashed down towards Ziyu. The vast and mighty water elemental energy emanating from the seal caused this part of the world to seem to be filled with water ripples. The water elemental energy seemed to have taken a tangible form, surging mightily above the arena like the waves of the sea, enveloping Ziyu from all directions. This was the extraordinary power of the black tortoise seal. Furthermore, this was not the true power of this precious treasure. If the black tortoise seal were to truly display its full power, it was unknown what kind of terrifying scene it would be. Rumble. The blue power that filled the sky was like waves as it poured down in torrents. It was as if there were thousands of soldiers and horses galloping, or as if there was a raging sea surging with waves. Faced with such a ferocious attack, the corners of Ziyu's mouth suddenly curled up, revealing the trace of a smile. Then, he calmly slammed his palm towards the black tortoise seal that was smashing down on his head. Chapter 56. Boom. The green palm that shot up into the sky violently collided with the black tortoise seal that came crashing down, exploding with an extremely loud sound. The blue water waves surged violently, and the tangible water elemental power was broken apart. The green palm was only the size of a normal person's palm, but it contained a vast amount of power. The giant seal in the sky trembled violently. Although it was not actually sent flying by the palm, it was still shaken. Everyone watching the battle could not help but be shocked. The palm that Ziyu had sent out was something that every disciple of the Taishan sect was very familiar with, because it was an entry-level technique of the Taishan sect, the Taishan mountain splitting palm. The Taishan mountain splitting palm, using one's own power as a guide, could release a tremendous power that could split a mountain. This was not an exaggeration. The black tortoise seal was already comparable to a small mountain. Zhao Ziru's expression immediately changed. This Ziyu's strength was indeed extremely powerful. With just his own power, he could shake the black tortoise seal. This was much more powerful than Song Ruochen the day before. Zhao Ziru hurriedly formed a seal, and sent a wave of power into the black tortoise seal in the sky that was repeatedly shaken by the impact of Ziyu's 5-ding mountain splitting palm. The giant seal that floated above Ziyu's head immediately shone brightly, and stopped shaking. It surged with boundless water elemental power, and the sky was filled with surging blue water waves that seemed to have substance, smashing down towards Ziyu. The black tortoise seal was a water elemental magic treasure. It contained great power, and it could draw the water elemental power between heaven and earth to attack the enemy. It was a great killing weapon of the Purple Bamboo Peak. The black tortoise seal emitted an incomparably powerful pressure, and it directly affected Ziyu's heart. In his mind, it destroyed his fighting spirit, and shook his confidence. In a battle between experts, aura sometimes played a decisive role. If an expert's aura was taken away, and fear arose in his heart, then his entire ability would be reduced by 40 to 50%. Ziyu obviously wouldn't make such a low-level mistake. Just as the black tortoise seal above his head began to smash towards his head again, he stretched out his right hand and a dark green light flew out from his sleeve. Ziyu held the green light in one hand and brushed it upwards. Instantly, a powerful spiritual energy ripple spread out from the green light. The misty plant essence chi was like a dark green mist as it rushed up to meet the black tortoise seal that was smashing down. Only now did everyone clearly see what the green light in Ziyu's hand was. It was actually a jade green branch that was about 2 feet long, and there were 7 or 8 emerald green leaves on the branch. What kind of magic treasure is this? Besides feeling shocked in their hearts, all the young disciples couldn't help but guess what the branch in Ziyu's hand was, to actually be able to emit such an extremely formidable second wood essence. That branch was not an ordinary item. As it moved, it seemed to gather the wood elemental energy in the world. Dots of green light faintly appeared on the trees outside the square, gathering towards the 8th arena. The wood elemental energy surged on the arena. Ziyu continuously brushed the branch in his hand, and the misty wood elemental energy was like a green cloud. It actually blocked the huge seal that was smashing down from the sky, causing the black tortoise seal to stop its downward momentum, freezing it in the air. The water elemental energy that surged out from the black tortoise seal enveloped a part of the world, and collided with the wood elemental energy that was charging up from below. The two waves of energy continuously collided, continuously cancelled each other out, and unceasingly produced each other. In the sky, there was a rumble that was like muffled thunder. The remnant might of the two waves of energy swept down from the arena. The expressions of the spectators below the arena instantly changed, and they hurriedly retreated and dodged. The spirit branch in Ziyu's hand had actually blocked the precious treasure of purple bamboo peak, the black tortoise seal. This greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. Zhao Ziru was even more shocked, and also felt a trace of fear. She repeatedly circulated her magic power, pouring it into the black tortoise seal that had transformed into the size of a small mountain above Ziyu's head, and did her best to activate the power of the black tortoise seal. But no matter how Zhao Ziru activated the black tortoise seal, she was unable to break through the misty dark green light below. The power emitted by the spirit branch in Ziyu's hand did not seem to be inferior to the black tortoise seal. Long Hongxue, the head of Purple Bamboo Peak, who was sitting on the steps in front of the palace and watching the battle in the 8th arena, said, "Senior Martial Brother Sect Leader, isn't the branch in Ziyu's hand a branch that one of your disciples broke off from a spiritual root in the Ruin Heaven realm 100 years ago? I can't believe Senior Martial Brother has refined it into a unique treasure." The Ruined Sky realm was a land of treasures, but also a land of great danger. There were natural treasures that had long been extinct in the outside world, as well as treasures left behind by those extraordinary and powerful people from ancient times. After entering the Ruined Sky realm, if one was fated with the treasures, they would be able to obtain them. Daoist Shentian, who sat in the middle, smiled faintly and did not answer. A trace of surprise flashed in the eyes of the other branch heads. As brilliant as they were, they could already tell that there was no suspense in this match. At this moment, the situation on the arena had already changed. Ziyu's right hand brushed the spirit branch, while his left hand pressed towards Zhao Ziru. A strange fluctuation immediately spread out from his left hand. *ZZZT ZZZT ZZZT. Countless dark green vines instantly grew out of the void, rapidly piercing through the air and emitting strange sounds as they entangled towards Zhao Ziru. "Inescapable net!" Ziyu shouted in a low voice. His left hand formed a seal, and the endless vines that appeared out of nowhere immediately spread out. From top to bottom, left and right, they sealed off all of Zhao Ziru's paths of retreat and closed in on her. Ziyu cultivated in wood elemental Dao techniques. At this moment, his wood elemental magic surged violently on his body, causing his frail body to emit a powerful pressure. At this moment, Ziyu seemed to have found the masculinity that a man should have, becoming rather manly. Hiss. Zhao Ziru sucked in a breath of cold air. She had never imagined that Ziyu would be able to so easily use Dao techniques to attack her while blocking the black tortoise seal. It was difficult for her to use the black tortoise seal to defend against Ziyu's vine attack. She had no choice but to wave her hand and recall the black tortoise seal that was floating above Ziyu's head. The black tortoise seal instantly appeared above Zhao Ziru's head. Boundless water blue might descended mightily, and the vines that were entangling from all directions and were about to attack Zhao Ziru's body immediately collapsed under the impact of the water elemental power, and then disappeared in the void. The black tortoise seal protected her body, and waves of water blue membrane instantly formed around Zhao Ziru's body. The water elemental power that was emitted from the black tortoise seal seemed to have solidified, and the area around Zhao Ziru's body seemed to have really become an ocean, surging violently. The thousands of vines that were entangling Zhao Ziru immediately collapsed and disappeared, and Ziyu's Dao technique was broken. The instant the Dao technique was broken, Ziyu's face flushed red, and he seemed to have received an impact. Asterisk swish. Asterisk asterisk swish. Asterisk asterisk swish. Asterisk Ziyu repeatedly waved the spirit branch in his hand, and shot out rays of dark green light, blocking all the power of the 5 elements that were surging towards him. Then, the spirit branch in his hand suddenly shone with a green light, and an extremely huge wave of emu essence chi instantly exploded from the spirit branch. Within the green light, the spirit branch in Ziyu's hand actually instantly grew into a huge tree that was more than 100 feet tall, and it was a treasure tree that looked like it was carved out of a top-grade jade. The power of the wood elemental power between heaven and earth immediately gathered, and dots of green light surrounded the tree. The 7 or 8 leaves had already become the size of a palm leaf fan, and there was a misty green aura surrounding them. Ziyu felt a wave of exhaustion, and he almost lost control of the treasure tree that was transformed from a branch. Because, in order to activate the power of the spirit branch, the power in Ziyu's body was almost sucked dry by the spirit branch. Asterisk raw. Asterisk Ziyu hugged the treasure tree that was more than 100 feet tall, and directly swept it towards the giant seal that was the size of a small mountain that was floating above Zhao Ziru's head. At this moment, the treasure tree blossomed with boundless dark green light, and it dyed the heaven and earth green. The heavy power of the water elemental power that was emitted from the black tortoise seal was actually forced away. Zhao Ziru was instantly shocked, and at this moment, the treasure tree that was more than 100 feet tall had already swept fiercely onto the black tortoise seal. The direct collision of the 2 treasures immediately caused the heaven and earth on the arena to tremble violently, and the vast and mighty power that was emitted almost destroyed the arena. The giant seal, under the shocked gazes of the crowd, was swept away by the treasure tree, and Zhao Ziru also flew out of the arena as if she was struck by lightning. After the black tortoise seal was swept away, it quickly shrank, and finally returned to the size of a fist, and the treasure tree also turned back into a spirit branch. The head of the purple bamboo peak, Long Hongxue, who was sitting on the steps in front of the hall, waved his hand, and the black tortoise seal was kept into his big sleeve. Chapter 57. The battle between Zhao Ziru and Ziyu made everyone gasp in amazement. The treasure of purple bamboo peak, the black tortoise seal, had actually been sent flying by Ziyu with an unknown magical weapon. It was truly surprising. However, Ziyu was a disciple of the Taishen peak. The Taishen sect had been in charge of the treasures of the sect for generations. It was expected that he would have a few secret treasures. On the contrary, if a large Taoist sect like the Taishen sect did not have a few secret treasures, it would be strange. When the power of the magical weapons was equal, one's own cultivation became crucial. Ziyu's cultivation was much higher than Zhao Ziru's. This was the key to her defeat. The spirit branch in Ziyu's hand had already been put back into his sleeve. He then jumped off the platform. The disciples of the Taishen peak immediately came forward to congratulate Ziyu on his victory. Junior brother Ziyu, well done. Li Lingfeng patted Ziyu on the shoulder and said with a faint smile. Although the battle between Ziyu and Ziyu was wonderful, in the eyes of those with discerning eyes, the outcome had long been decided. The spirit branch in Ziyu's hand was enough to withstand the black tortoise seal, and then it was a contest of their own Dao power. In a contest of Dao power, Zhao Ziru was obviously no match for Ziyu. Haha. Thank you senior brother for your praise. Ziyu smiled, then walked with Li Lingfeng to where the disciples of the Taishen sect were gathered outside the square. On the other side of the square, in the tent set up by the disciples of Purple Bamboo Peak, Zhao Ziru sat cross-legged on the ground with her eyes closed. Her master, Yang Xingyun, placed one hand on her back, stirred up the spiritual power in his body, and poured it into Zhao Ziru's body through his palm. When Ziyu had used the spirit branch to send the black tortoise seal flying, her Dao technique had been broken. She immediately suffered a great impact, and her Dao power was almost shaken away. After being carried back by Yang Xingyun immediately used his own Dao power to strengthen Zhao Ziru's foundation and nurture her true essence, so that her cultivation would not regress. The 9 revolutions of cultivation, the Taoist true essence in Zhao Ziru's dantian that was condensed from essence, qi, and spirit began to spread out bursts of Dao power, nourishing her body and nourishing her primordial spirit. Zhao Ziru's exhaustion was immediately dispelled. Her dispirited spirit became energetic once more. The cultivation techniques of Taoism followed the path of core formation and nascent soul. The body was the cauldron, and the essence, qi, and spirit were the medicine in the cauldron. The essence, qi, and spirit were refined, thus achieving the trinity, forming the Tao core, and then cultivating the nascent soul and nascent soul. In Taoism, the body was nothing more than a cauldron that had to be abandoned in the end. Therefore, Taoism's cultivation focused on the essence, qi, and spirit, and would not pay too much attention to the cauldron that was the body. However, before reaching the nascent soul or nascent soul stage, this cauldron was still extremely important to cultivators. If the Dharma body was damaged and the cauldron was damaged, it would definitely affect one's cultivation. As a result, even though she was already full of energy, Zhao Ziru did not stop her cultivation. Instead, she continued to sit cross-legged on the ground and nurtured the Tao energy condensed from essence, energy, and spirit in her dantian, carefully nourishing the cauldron that was her body. On the other hand, after seeing that Zhao Ziru was fine, her master, Yang Hangyun, walked out of the tent and continued to pay attention to the matches on the 9 arenas in the square. From morning to noon, the first match of the 42 disciples of the 9 branches who had won the day before finally ended. Among them, the most eye-catching matches were the battle between Ji Yufei and Lei Ao, the battle between Zhao Ziru and Ziyu, and the battle between Li Lingfeng. It had to be said that although Li Lingfeng did not have a handsome appearance, his cultivation far surpassed his peers, and the strength he displayed was shocking. None of the people who fought against him were able to last more than 15 minutes against him. They were all easily defeated by him, and it was under the situation where he did not use any treasures. However, no matter how intense and exciting the matches on the field were, Ji Yufei, who was sitting cross-legged under a large tree outside the square, was like an old monk in meditation. He did not even open his eyes, as if he was truly isolated from the outside world. I have already broken into the 8th heavenly layer, why can't I refine the essence of the short rod in my body? Ji Yufei was adapting to the new power, but he found that the sword hilt-like purple rod that he had refined into his body with the weapon-refining body transformation had not been completely refined into the blood and qi in his body. Ji Yufei knew that this item left behind by his master was not as ordinary as it looked on the surface. It seemed to be an amazing treasure. With his current cultivation, it was still difficult for him to completely refine it. The purple essence in his body flowed along with the blood and qi in his body. With just a thought, Ji Yufei could make a certain part of his body have the characteristics of this short rod. This was the power of the weapon-refining body transformation. Once the body was transformed into a divine weapon, it would be unparalleled. As Ji Yufei's cultivation increased, the divine weapon that he had refined into his body could also exert greater power. With the help of the power of thunder and lightning, Ji Yufei successfully refined his body. Using this extreme method, he stimulated the potential in his body and made a breakthrough in the body refining technique, achieving great success in blood transformation. Looking inside, Ji Yufei could feel that the blood and qi flowing in his body contained a huge amount of essence, emitting a strong aura of life. It was constantly nourishing his blood, flesh, tendons, and bones, and his entire body's bones began to become as translucent as jade. The 8th heavenly layer of the awakening self-realm was the step of shedding ordinary bones, making the bones of the whole body extraordinary. All of Ji Yufei's bones were already harder than steel, and it was absolutely no problem for him to resist ordinary magic treasures. It was no wonder that the indestructible body in the cave at the bottom of the icy jade lake could not melt after so many years, and still looked like a living person, vivid and lifelike. It was all because the indestructible body's physical body was too strong. Its blood, flesh, tendons, and bones were no longer ordinary, and contained great power. Although the person was already dead, the power contained in the blood, flesh, tendons, and bones did not dissipate, but were firmly bound within the body, making the flesh immortal and invulnerable. And now, Ji Yufei's body was also transforming in the direction of the indestructible body. Ji Yufei sat under the tree for several hours, until it was his turn again in the afternoon. He opened his eyes and stood up from under the tree. The biggest dark horse in this 9-peak trials was undoubtedly Ji Yufei. Before the 9-peak trials, no one was optimistic about Ji Yufei, and everyone thought that he would be eliminated in the first round. Who would have thought that not only would Ji Yufei not be eliminated, but he would also consecutively defeat the 2 top disciples of Biyun Peak, Dongfang Chen and Lei Ao. Dongfang Chen was also known as the second strongest among the younger generation. From then on, no one doubted Ji Yufei's strength, and no one dared to underestimate him. A powerful martial artist, a martial artist who could resist the power of thunder and lightning, made the hearts of the younger generation palpitate. Perhaps, only the number 1 of the younger generation, Li Lingfeng, could be a match for him. And the battle between Li Lingfeng and Ji Yufei would also come soon. The number 1 youth expert of the Taishen sect, among the young disciples of the 9-peak Shen sects, only one could obtain this honor. Who would be the first? This was something that everyone was curious about. Originally, the most outstanding disciple of Biyun Peak, Dongfang Chen, had the qualifications to be the first. However, his qualifications had been forcibly removed by the sudden appearance of Ji Yufei, causing him to no longer have any relationship with the first place. Now, everyone believed that the battle for the first place would only be fought between 2 people. Those 2 people were the only successor of Green Spirit Peak, Ji Yufei, and the eldest disciple of Taishen Peak, Li Lingfeng. Although many people found it hard to accept, Ji Yufei's sudden rise among the younger generation was already an unchangeable fact. Ji Yufei's second opponent in the second round was not Li Lingfeng, but a disciple of another branch. This was a match without any suspense. In the face of Ji Yufei's overwhelming strength, the disciple's Dao technique was quickly broken by Ji Yufei and he was sent flying out of the arena with a single punch. He was utterly defeated. In the evening, the second round of competition ended, and then another list was posted. In today's competition, 28 people had been eliminated. In the last round of competition tomorrow, the top 10 young experts would be produced from the 14 disciples who had successfully advanced to the third round of competition today. On the square, the disciples of each branch dispersed one after another, returning to their respective training grounds. The most talked about thing among the disciples was Ji Yufei's performance today, which was breathtaking and dazzling. Ji Yufei was already destined to become the topic of discussion in the Taishen sect. His strength, his boldness, and his reckless body-refining process had all become the topic of discussion among the disciples. Night fell. In the cave of Green Spirit Peak, Ji Yufei sat cross-legged on a praying mat, motionless. His mind was completely immersed in training. As he inhaled and exhaled, he moved the air around him. Specks of multicolored light lingered around his body, and the bronze skin that was exposed outside his clothes flowed with a sparkling luster. The blood and qi that flowed under his skin washed over him in waves, tempering his skin and flesh. As his flesh and blood trembled, wisps of life essence energy were released, seeping into his muscles and bones, covering them with a layer of precious light. In his dantian, the life essence condensed into a multicolored ball of light the size of an egg. It flickered, and the 5 elements of essence produced from his flesh and blood gathered in his dantian. After being refined by the life essence, the impure impurities were filtered out, and then they were dispersed and reintegrated into his flesh and blood. The cycle in Ji Yufei's body repeated itself over and over again. There was no end to it, and there was no end to it. The flow of essence in Ji Yufei's body did not seem to be a Daoist technique at all, but it also seemed to follow some kind of rule of heaven and earth. It was so natural, as if it should be like this. The transformation of his flesh, blood, tendons, and bones would cause his strength to transform. Conversely, the transformation of his strength would promote the transformation of his tendons, bones, and flesh. The two were connected, and on the path of cultivation, Jiyu Fei's body would become even more powerful. Chapter 58. Just as Jiyu Fei entered a deep meditative state, in the peach forest behind Taishan Peak, there were two figures in white standing under the peach tree in front of the wooden house. "Brother, how confident are you that you can win first place in tomorrow's competition?" A handsome young man, who was so handsome that even beautiful women paled in comparison, said to an ordinary-looking young man in white. This peach forest behind the mountain was Li Lingfeng's place of cultivation. The ordinary-looking young man was Li Lingfeng, and the person talking to him was his junior brother, Ziyu. "I don't care who wins or loses, but this time, the head ancestor seems to pay special attention to this 9 vein trials. I feel that something is about to happen," Li Lingfeng said with a frown. The atmosphere between the head ancestor and the other 7 chiefs seems to be a little strange. I heard from some of the senior brothers in the transcending mortality realm that in the past 9 vein trials, the branches rarely used precious treasures, but this time, the 7 chiefs all gave out precious treasures, hoping that the disciples who participated in the competition would win, Ziyu said. The ruined sky realm opened once every 100 years. Few people even in the 3 great Taoist sects knew about this, let alone these young disciples who had only been in the sect for 10 years. However, Li Lingfeng and Ziyu had also vaguely noticed that something was amiss during the 9 peak trials. After the two talked for a while, they could not find any clues, so Ziyu said goodbye and left. Li Lingfeng also walked into the wooden house. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The mountains seemed particularly quiet. Except for the occasional roar of beasts in the dense forests and the places where fierce beasts roamed, there was no other sound to break this silence. However, in the sea of clouds hundreds of miles away from Taishan Mountain, a golden beam of light broke through the clouds and rushed out like a dragon. Swoosh! The dragon-like golden light turned and tore through the night sky like a golden bolt of lightning, flying toward Taishan Mountain. In an instant, it disappeared into the sky. At the summit of Taishan Peak, in the rear hall of Supreme Mystery Temple, where the headmaster, Daoist Shentian, cultivated, Daoist Shentian suddenly opened his eyes. Then, he disappeared from the praying mat in an instant. In the next moment, Daoist Xuantian's figure appeared in the sky above the Supreme Mystery Temple. His sleeves fluttered in the wind and his white hair fluttered in the wind. He exuded an otherworldly aura. Daoist Shentian was like a celestial being, like a true immortal descending to the world. He looked towards the eastern horizon and saw a flash of golden light. When the golden light first appeared, it was still far away on the horizon. No one knew how far it was, but in the blink of an eye, it came closer. Like a golden bolt of lightning, it made a slight sound as it flew into the range of Taishan Mountain. In the blink of an eye, it was near the 9 peaks of Taishan. The square immortal sect's flying sword messenger. How sharp was Daoist Xuantian's eyes? He could tell at a glance that this golden light was a flying sword released by a master swordsman. This shining golden light was only about 3 feet long, but he could not see the shape of a sword. It was very different from a real sword. From far away, Daoist Shentian could feel the cold sword chi that came from the golden light. From the cold sword chi that came from the sword light, it was righteous and not evil. This was definitely a flying sword that had been refined using Shenmen techniques. The Guangqing Immortal Sect cultivated authentic sword techniques. Their skills were all in the sword. As long as they had a sword in hand, they could kill anyone in their way. It was the most powerful technique in the Taoism. At this time, the golden sword chi had already flown above the 9 peaks of Taishan. However, at this time, there seemed to be a great power that was activated. A power like a wave of water blocked the golden sword chi outside the 9 peaks. It turned out that the protective matrix of the Taishan sect had come into play. After the attack of the demon lord of 6 paths, the protective matrix of the Taishan sect had been broken by the mysterious Tai Chi diagram. It had taken the Taishan sect a whole year to barely activate the matrix. The spiritual stones used to activate the matrix were very rare in the world of cultivation. It was very difficult to gather 81 of these spiritual stones, which contained a great amount of spiritual chi. Without spiritual stones to suppress the eye of the matrix, other spiritual items were used instead. However, the power of the Great Mountain Guarding Formation was much weaker than the original formation. Even so, the golden light could not break through the formation no matter how hard it tried. It was enough to show the power of the Great Mountain Guarding Formation. Daoist Shentian looked at the golden sword light in the distance and couldn't help but frown. Why did Shenyuan send a message to me with a flying sword? As he said this, he reached out his right hand and grabbed the golden sword chi. Immediately, a faint, illusory palm transcended the distance of space and reached out from the formation. It grabbed the golden light in its hand and then retracted back into the formation. Shentian Taoist removed a jade scroll from the flying sword. He loosened his grip, and the golden sword light immediately rose from his hand. It flashed a few times, and then quickly flew out of Taishan Mountain. Soon, the golden sword light came from the east and headed east before disappearing into the eastern horizon. Daoist Shentian held the jade scroll in his hand. With a thought, his mind immediately seeped into the jade scroll and learned all the information contained in it. After reading the contents of the jade scroll, Daoist Shentian could no longer remain calm. He muttered to himself, "I didn't expect the trip to the ruined sky realm to be brought forward." Daoist Shentian lowered his head and thought for a while before his body flickered and he disappeared from the sky above Taishan Temple. On the morning of the third day of the Nine Peaks trials, the melodious sound of a bell echoed through the mountains. All the disciples of Taishan sect came out of their training places and gathered at Taishan Peak. Today, the top 10 young masters of the younger generation would be chosen from the 14 outstanding disciples who had won the previous day. Everyone thought that the title of the top master would be decided between Ji Yufei and Li Lingfeng. Ji Yufei and Li Lingfeng were both powerful young cultivators. Their cultivation was higher than that of their peers, and they could be said to be the two most outstanding geniuses of the younger generation with unlimited potential. Compared to Li Lingfeng, the upper echelons of Taishan sect paid more attention to Ji Yufei, because the cultivation method of Jade Spirit Peak was unimaginably difficult to cultivate. An ancient body cultivation method that was regarded as trash had been cultivated by Ji Yufei to the 8th level of the Awakening Self realm. Those who knew about this cultivation method found it hard to believe. The competition began. The 14 people were divided into 7 pairs and fought in the 1st to 7th arenas. As a result, there were 2 arenas on the square that were empty. These 14 people were all the most outstanding young masters of the Nine Peaks mysterious sect. Unfortunately, Zhao Ziru had lost both of her matches the previous day and had already been eliminated in the 2nd round. On the 3rd arena, Ji Yufei stared at the opponent in front of him. His sharp eyes were like blades as he stared at the opponent's face. Power surged from his body, and an oppressive aura filled the air. Chapter 59. On the 3rd arena, Ji Yufei and Ziyu stood facing each other. Ziyu's body was thin, and as he stood on the arena, he seemed to give off a light feeling, as if he could float away with the wind at any time. His handsome face, which could be said to be devilish, carried a trace of a faint smile, like a Buddha picking a flower, and actually revealed an otherworldly charm. Ziyu. Ji Yufei had a serious expression as he looked at the opponent in front of him, and his eyes narrowed into a line. He didn't let Ziyu's outer appearance be affected, and in the midst of it, his keen spiritual sense felt the well-concealed pressure on Ziyu's body. That's right, the handsome youth in front of him made Ji Yufei feel pressure. Junior brother Ji Yu, please advise me. With a flip of Ziyu's right hand, a jade green, crystalline, and translucent 7-leafed tree branch that was like top-grade jade appeared in his hand. This was a magic treasure refined from the branch of a spiritual root of heaven and earth. As soon as he saw the branch in Ziyu's hand that emitted an enormous wood elemental power, Ji Yufei's pupils immediately contracted, and rays of light shot out from his eyes. Ji Yufei had long since heard that yesterday, Ziyu had used a branch to sweep away the black tortoise seal of the purple bamboo peak, and defeated Zhao Ziru. You flatter me. Ji Yufei cupped his fists, and then took a step forward. A powerful aura swept out from his body as he took this step. His hair fluttered without wind, and his clothes fluttered from the impact of the airflow that burst out from his body. The third arena was undoubtedly one of the most eye-catching places on the square. All the disciples were watching, wanting to know if Jiyu Fei's undefeated streak could continue, or if Ziyu would end his undefeated legend since the Nine Peaks trials. Wang Yuanji, the disciple of the Great Void Peak who had an inexplicable grudge with Jiyu Fei, was also mixed in the crowd of spectators below the arena. He looked fiercely at the figure who seemed to have transformed into a god of war and emitted a powerful pressure, as if he wished for nothing more than to swallow that person into his stomach. He was here to watch a show, to watch Jiyu Fei make a fool of himself, to watch Jiyu Fei be defeated. In the Supreme Mystery Sect, the only one who had conflicts with Jiyu Fei was Wang Yuanji, the narrow-minded disciple of an aristocratic family. Only he hoped that Jiyu Fei would be defeated. And the majority of the people all harbored intense curiosity as they watched the battle. They were very curious who would win the battle between Jiyu Fei and Ziyu. Under the ring, the most excited group of people were the young disciples of Taishan Peak. The disciples of Taishan Peak were divided into two groups. One group was cheering for Ziyu below the third ring, while the other group was cheering for Li Lingfeng on the first ring. There was also a small group of people who were cheering for the other two outstanding disciples of Taishan Peak who had advanced. It had to be said that among the disciples of the younger generation of Taishan Peak, there were many outstanding figures. Among the 9 branches of Taishan Peak, there were actually 4 people who had overcome all the difficulties and entered the final round of the competition, which was enough to show that the disciples of the leader of Taishan Peak were extraordinary. Among the people who were watching the battle, there was one person who was very worried about Jiyu Fei on the ring. This person was a beautiful girl. Zhao Ziru was very clear about Ziyu's terror. With Ziyu's strength, coupled with that spirit branch in his hand, it was absolutely difficult to find a match among his peers. Just as Jiyu Fei took a step forward, Ziyu moved. The powerful sense of oppression emitted from Jiyu Fei made him feel uncomfortable. Swoosh! The green shadow in his hand waved, and a misty green light immediately rushed out from the 7-leaf spirit root, surging towards Jiyu Fei in an overwhelming manner. That was the extremely pure Emu essence. In the misty green light, layers of tree shadows emerged, as if there was an endless stretch of dense green wood, squeezing towards Jiyu Fei. The power of the wood element. Jiyu Fei could be said to be extremely familiar with the essence of the 5 elements of heaven and earth, because he cultivated the refining body technique, and the life essence produced from his flesh and blood was the chi of the human body. However, his chi of the 5 elements was from his own flesh and blood, and was refined into chi, which was different from the power of the 5 elements in this big world. Among the 5 elements, metal restrains wood. I will use the metal element fist to break your Taoist technique. With that, Jiyu Fei's punch, which had been accumulating power for a long time, blasted forward like lightning. In front of his right fist, suddenly the wind was mighty, and the golden light was like a golden blade, sweeping forward, majestic and unstoppable. The power of the metal element fist that Jiyu Fei blasted out seemed to have completely turned into a tangible and substantial golden storm, constantly colliding with the thousands of giant trees that were surging and crashing in front of him. This was definitely a big collision between the power of the wood element and the power of the metal element fist, and the golden wind against the layers of green giant trees. The entire arena suddenly shook and trembled violently from the impact of the explosion of power, and all the people watching the battle below the arena quickly retreated. As if a dazzling golden sun had exploded in a green storm, Jiyu Fei's whole body was pulsating with a flame-like golden aura, and he rushed into the thousands of giant tree shadows in front of him, waving his fists fiercely. The incomparably powerful fist force was like a golden heavenly blade. It forcefully turned the thousands of tree shadows back into a ball of dark green light. When Ziyu saw this, he was immediately alarmed. He waved his hand repeatedly, and the 7-leaf treasured branch in his hand shot out layers of dark green light, transforming into a myriad of purple trees that launched wave after wave of powerful attacks at Jiyu Fei. The 7-leaf treasured tree branch emitted a surging green divine radiance that surrounded Jiyu Fei, completely sealing him off. 10,000 purple wood. With a light shout, Ziyu formed a seal with his hand and poured pure spiritual power into the 7-leaf treasured branch in his hand. Amidst the surging green light, the giant branches seemed to transform into real giant trees that had form and substance, exploding with an unprecedentedly powerful spiritual power fluctuation. With the force of a thunderbolt, they strangled towards Ji Yufei. However, surrounded by the surging wood elemental power that was like a green ocean, Ji Yufei displayed unparalleled power. Every time he threw a punch, he would definitely shatter a huge piece of wood. At the same time, he pressed towards Ziyu, who was in front of him, step by step. Bang! Ji Yufei pressed in front of Ziyu, and directly punched the 7-leaf tree branch in Ziyu's hand. The fierce power of the metal element fist caused the 7-leaf tree branch to flicker chaotically, and it almost flew out of Ziyu's hand. Ji Yufei was really too strong. His long hair danced wildly, like the reincarnation of the god of war, directly using his flesh and blood to contend with the powerful magic treasure. It was really crazy. After the punch hit the 7-leaf tree branch, the thousands of giant trees that surrounded Ji Yufei suddenly disappeared, and disappeared from the void. At the same time, Ziyu also suffered a great impact, his body unsteady, and he staggered back 5 or 6 steps. When Ji Yufei's punch hit the 7-leaf tree branch, at the same time as it shook the 7-leaf tree branch, Ji Yufei also felt a pain in his fist, as if he had punched an incomparably hard iron, shaking his fist to the point of numbness. The 7-leaf tree branch was worthy of being an important treasure of the Taishen Peak. It was refined from a paper strip of a spirit root between heaven and earth. When Ji Yufei shook the 7-leaf tree branch, he himself was also forced back by the powerful emu essence that erupted from the 7-leaf tree branch. The crowd of Taishen sect disciples watching the battle below the arena were all shocked by the short and soul-stirring confrontation between Ji Yufei and Ziyu, and they were dumbfounded. Everyone was amazed again and again. This Ji Yufei was really too crazy, using his flesh and blood to fight a magic treasure. This was an expression that only a fool would have. Chapter 60. Ascending above the 9 heavens, breathing in the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, and attaining the path of immortality was the lifelong wish of every cultivator. But the path of immortality was vague, the grand Tao heartless, and the path of cultivation was filled with dangers and obstacles. The slightest carelessness would cause one to fall back into samsara. Thus, when cultivators comprehended the grand Tao of heaven and earth, they had to utilize various methods to seek fortune and avoid calamity, in order to protect their own safety. Magic treasures were the protective magic treasures that cultivators used to resist natural and man-made disasters. The magic treasures of cultivators were Daoist magic treasures that were refined day and night with their own Daoist energy, causing them to be intelligent and possess great power. Generally speaking, the higher the cultivation of a cultivator, the greater the power of the magic treasures refined. For example, the black tortoise seal of Violet Bamboo Peak and the 7-leaf treasured tree branch in Ziyu's hand were both refined by great cultivators at the realm of void controlling. In this way, to completely bring out the power of these 2 magic treasures, the cultivator using these 2 magic treasures had to at least have a cultivation at the realm of void controlling. Ziyu's cultivation was only at the early 8th level of the awakened heaven, and he could only bring out a very small portion of the power of the 7-leaf treasured tree branch. Thus, Ji Yufei was able to shake this powerful magic treasure of Taishen Peak. If the power of this magic treasure was fully unleashed, even if Ji Yufei had 10 lives, it wouldn't be enough to kill him. On the arena, Ji Yufei pressed forward step by step, repeatedly using his fists to forcefully collide with the 7-leaf treasured tree branch in Ziyu's hand. The dazzling golden light and the dark green wood essence chi violently collided, exploding out with loud sounds that were like muffled thunder. The arena beneath Ji Yufei's feet also shook violently from his heavy footsteps that were like mountains, as if it would fall apart and collapse at any moment. The fist of metal was incomparably domineering. Even if Ziyu repeatedly executed powerful Dao techniques and even released thousands of thorny vines to entangle Ji Yufei, they were all shattered by the force of his fists. Ziyu actually seemed to be at a disadvantage. Unarmed, he was actually able to force Ziyu, who was wielding the 7-leaf treasured tree branch, into a disadvantageous position. The combat power that Ji Yufei displayed was truly unbelievable. Senior sect leader, This Jade Spirit Peak Branch's skill does not seem to be underestimated. Xuanfa Daoist, who was sitting on the steps in front of the square, suddenly said to Shentian Daoist beside him. This little fellow is not simple. At such a young age, he has actually cultivated the Jade Spirit Peak Branch's cultivation method to such a level. Even at such a young age, he seems to be not much inferior. Long Hongshua sect leader of Spirit Sect also said, and, one, and, of, and, son and. But, no one knew that Jiyu Fei was not an amazing cultivation genius. The reason why he had such a cultivation level was that he had a secret that no one knew except for him. A piece of yin-yang jade pendant could increase his cultivation speed by 10 times. In addition to increasing his cultivation speed, this piece of yin-yang jade pendant could also gather the surrounding spiritual energy when Jiyu Fei was cultivating. It was this piece of jade that had been integrated into Jiyu Fei's chest, leaving only a faint mark of the Tai Chi diagram on his skin, that had greatly increased Jiyu Fei's cultivation level. However, this mysterious yin-yang jade pendant had suddenly flown out of Jiyu Fei's chest on the night that the Demon Lord of Six Paths came to Taishen Sect a year ago. Not only had it forcibly extracted part of the spiritual energy contained in the mirror of heaven and earth, but it had also broken the protective array of the Taishen Sect. It had also completely absorbed the spiritual energy of the 81 spirit stones that had been used to suppress the eye of the array. After absorbing such a huge amount of spiritual energy, the mysterious yin-yang jade pendant seemed to have quietened down. After it had been integrated into Jiyu Fei's chest, there had been nothing wrong with it for the past year. 10 times the speed of cultivation had greatly benefited Jiyu Fei. It had greatly increased the speed at which he absorbed spiritual energy from the outside world. He did not have to worry about his strength running out. Every time he punched out, it was as if a golden sun had exploded above his fist, shaking the world. When he used his full strength, he was able to break through all kinds of Taoist techniques and force Ziyu to retreat again and again. Swoosh! With the 8 desolation steps, Jiyu Fei suddenly left a shadow where he had been standing and shot into the sky. He used the golden element fist to break through the heavy power of the wood element and leaped into the air. Ha ha! Jiyu Fei suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed. His voice was deafening, and the rolling sound waves cut through the sky, causing the ears of the disciples watching the battle to ring. Jiyu Fei's hair was flying in the wind. His eyes were as sharp as a blade. His tall and straight body suddenly turned upside down and swooped down. Metal and wood as one. As Jiyu Fei shouted, his expression became extremely serious. He punched down with both fists. His right fist shot out a bright golden light, and his left fist revealed a misty green light. It stirred up a fierce wind, as if it had triggered the power of metal and wood in the 5 elements of heaven and earth. A large amount of dazzling light poured down. This. Ziyu, who raised his head and saw this scene, was shocked. His face instantly became pale. That is. He. How is it possible? Ziyu could clearly feel that the aura on Jiyu Fei's body had undergone an earth-shattering change. His body actually revealed 2 surging forces at the same time. One of the forces was extremely familiar to Ziyu, because it was the surging power of the wood element. How could the 2 forces coexist in one body? This was really unbelievable. This time, not only was Ziyu inexplicably surprised, but the disciples of the Supreme Mystery Sect who had witnessed all these changes were also dumbfounded, as if they had been petrified. In the sky above the arena, the 2 forces constantly collided with each other. Not only did they not weaken these 2 forces, but they also continued to rise, erupting with even more powerful energy fluctuations. The power of the 2 elements as one was still astonishing. This was a battle skill that Jiyu Fei had comprehended after his cultivation broke through to the 8th layer of the awakening realm. This kind of battle skill, if used to the extreme, could make the 5 elements as one, erupt with a terrifying power that would make even the heaven and earth lose color. Right now, Jiyu Fei could only make the 2 elements as one. Jiyu Fei's use of this battle skill of the 2 elements as one was not smooth, because he had not yet completely grasped this battle skill, nor was he proficient in using it. However, even so, he was able to constantly erupt with his potential. The metal element fist and the wood element fist collided, and the power of the two elements intertwined. The power of the two elements continued to rise, and the power of the unity was like the Milky Way pouring down from the sky. It was unstoppable, and the terrifying power caused the heaven and earth to tremble. The arena below shook violently, and cracks appeared on the arena. The spiritual power that was exerted on the arena seemed to be unable to withstand such a violent and unparalleled power pouring down from the sky, and it could collapse at any time. Seeing this scene, the people around the arena couldn't help but be shocked. They quickly retreated far away, hiding far away, not daring to approach the arena. On the steps in front of the square, the 7 chiefs and the sect master, Taoist Shentian, were both moved at this moment. The power of the two elements as one was actually so shocking. The spiritual power exerted on the arena to protect it from damage was enough to withstand a full-force attack from a cultivator at the peak of the 9th heaven. Didn't that mean that the power of Gu Fei's two elements as one was actually comparable to a full-force attack from a cultivator at the peak of the 9th heaven? Cultivators, terrifying cultivators, invincible in the same level. This was indeed not groundless. Even if the green spirit peak was facing the danger of decline, they still did not give up on cultivating this ancient body refining technique, and it was not a reckless move. In the crowd, Zhao Ziru looked at the figure that was swooping down from the sky with great surprise, and her beautiful eyes sparkled. At this moment, Ziyu, who was facing the two elements as one attack head-on, felt as if there was a mountain pressing down on him from the heavens. The vast and mighty force pressed down on him to the point he was almost unable to straighten his back. What a good Gu Fei, I didn't expect you to be so powerful. It seems that I've underestimated you. Ziyu's mind spun rapidly. Seeing that the unparalleled power of the two elements as one was about to envelop him, he actually did something that no one would have thought of. Ziyu, a disciple of the Great Mystery Peak, swung the 7-leaf treasured branch in his hand, and shot out surging streams of emu essence, which actually rushed out from under Gu Fei's fist. Gu Fei's two elements as one, and an unparalleled fist force erupted. The fist force enveloped the entire arena. If Ziyu wanted to rush out of the encirclement of Gu Fei's fist force, it was equivalent to rushing out of the arena. In this way, as long as Ziyu's feet landed outside the arena, he would be considered to have lost this match. However, Ziyu really did rush out of the arena under the surprised gazes of the crowd. Roar. The instant Ziyu rushed out of the arena, he gave a furious roar. A powerful mana undulation suddenly erupted from his body. His two legs strode in the air, and actually made an inconceivable turn in the air. It was as if there was an invisible ladder in the air, going against the air and scurrying into the air. Ziyu's body actually brushed past the unparalleled fist force that Gu Fei blasted down. Not only did he avoid the fist force, he even arrived at a position at the same height as Gu Fei. Swoosh! The 7-leaf treasured branch in Ziyu's hand suddenly shone with extraordinary splendor. Amidst the twining of dark green light, it suddenly grew explosively into a treasure tree over 100 feet long. Ziyu raised the treasure tree high and smashed it down towards Gu Fei's head without the slightest bit of hesitation. Gu Fei's strength was seriously astonishing to the extreme. His martial arts techniques and mystical abilities were hard to contend with. Even with a powerful magic treasure in hand, it also made Ziyu feel the aura of danger. Humph! Gu Fei gave a cold laugh and still dived down rapidly. However, the fist force of the two elements as one was retracted. Thud. Gu Fei's body landed on the arena. As if his feet had stepped on an incomparably huge drum, a muffled sound rang out. The right side of his body was surrounded by golden light, while the left side of his body was pulsating with dark green light like ghost fire. The power of metal and wood surged on his body, causing him to look extremely strange. Just as Gu Fei landed on the arena, the giant tree that was surrounded by green light and emitted a powerful undulation of mana like a mountain had already smashed down towards his head. Roar! Gu Fei's two fists closed and punched upwards. His right fist was metal and his left fist was wood. Two elements as one, his two fists continuously vibrated. Two different types of power entangled and struck towards the giant treasure tree that was smashing down. Boom! The energy wave formed by the interweaving power of the two elements instantly collided with the treasure tree transformed from the seven-leaf treasured branch. The powerful fist force, under everyone's shocked gaze, directly blew away the treasure tree that was smashing down. Ziyu's body shook violently and he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. As if he was struck by lightning, he flew backwards. Boom! With a loud noise, the arena beneath Jiyu Fei's feet finally could no longer withstand the unparalleled power that exploded and collapsed. Jiyu Fei's body followed the collapse of the arena and fell straight down. Chapter 61. Ha! A beast-like roar burst forth from Jiyu Fei's throat as he spat out a mouthful of white air. Following a loud bang, the entire arena completely collapsed. Jiyu Fei fell to the ground amidst the flying pieces of wood. A raging energy storm swept out, and everyone nearby scrambled to avoid the flying pieces of wood. The arena was built of wood, and it was imbued with transcendence energy to protect it from being destroyed by the energy released during the battle. But now, the arena had collapsed. It was all because the destructive power displayed by Jiyu Fei and Ziyu was too strong. The arena, which was already protected by transcendence energy, could not withstand the impact of the power and was destroyed. After colliding head-on with the treasure tree transformed from the seven leaves tree branch, Jiyu Fei immediately felt a sharp pain in his arms. It was as if thousands of sharp needles were stabbing into the flesh of his arms at the same time, and it was unbearable. He hurriedly looked down and saw that the sleeves of his arms had long disappeared. On his fists and forearms, dense beads of blood seeped out. From his fists all the way to his forearms, his skin cracked like a spider's web on the dry ground. In the attack just now, he had used the combined power of the metal and wood elements to blast away the treasure tree transformed from the seven leaves tree branch. However, his arms had also suffered an extremely fierce impact, and his skin and flesh had been torn by the power that erupted from the treasure tree. Jiyu Fei stood in the middle of the collapsed arena, urging the qi in his body to surge to his arms. As the skin and flesh of his arms trembled, the cracks on his skin and flesh immediately shrank, preventing blood from seeping out. With regards to the control of his flesh, blood, tendons, and bones, Jiyu Fei had already reached the point where he could command them like his own arms. It's only flesh and skin, not tendons and bones. It's not a big deal. As Jiyu Fei looked inside, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. The bones of his hands and arms were as clear as jade, glowing with a layer of white light. They were like exquisite works of art. They were in perfect condition, without any damage from the direct collision with the magic treasure. Jiyu Fei's legend of invincibility had never been broken since the Nine Peaks trial. Today, even Ziyu, who had mastered the treasure of Taishen Peak, the seven leaves tree branch, was defeated by Jiyu Fei's fist. This made all the young disciples extremely shocked. Especially Wang Yuanji, who had a grudge against Jiyu Fei. When he saw Ziyu's defeat, he immediately did not stay and walked away angrily. Jiyu Fei, I'd like to see how long you can be so mighty. Wang Yuanji walked toward the place where the disciples of his branch gathered, while hating Jiyu Fei. The disciples of Taishen Peak saw that Ziyu had been defeated by Jiyu Fei. They were disappointed, but they could not help but feel a little dissatisfied with Jiyu Fei. Jiyu Fei had beaten Ziyu until he spat out blood. He was too heavy-handed. The magic treasure of a cultivator was connected to the cultivator's mind and was closely related. It was equivalent to a part of the cultivator's body. Some spiritual magic treasures, even if they were thousands of miles away, as long as the owner of the magic treasure willed it, it would immediately fly back to the owner's hand. The seven leaves tree branch was blown away by Jiyu Fei, and Ziyu immediately suffered a great impact. The essence, qi, and spirit that he had attached to the magic treasure with his spiritual power were scattered, causing him to suffer some internal injuries. However, the seven leaves tree branch had borne most of the power of Jiyu Fei's dual element unification, and only a small part had affected Ziyu's body. In fact, Ziyu's injuries were not very serious. The battle between two young cultivators had collapsed the arena. This seemed to be unprecedented. The upper echelons of the Taishen sect all looked at the two of them with new eyes, especially Jiyu Fei. Although his disciple had been defeated, Taoist Shentian did not seem unhappy. Instead, his eyes flashed, as if he was very interested in Ji Fei. The 7 heads of the sect were surprised, and their faces became a little serious. The only disciple of the Green Spirit Peak seemed to be very complicated. At this time, Ji Fei walked out from the broken pieces of wood on the ground. The surrounding disciples looked at him with a strange look. "Senior brother, you won again. Congratulations." Zhao Ziru greeted him with a smile. Ji Fei's victory seemed to be even happier than her own victory. Ji Fei smiled and did not say anything. He walked to the side. Zhao Ziru hurriedly followed. When she saw the blood on Ji Fei's arm, she could not help but frown. She took out a small jade box and quickly walked forward. "Senior brother, wait!" Zhao Ziru shouted as she ran in front of Ji Fei. Then, she stretched out her hand and placed it in front of Ji Fei. "Here, this is the jade toad ointment that specializes in treating external injuries." At this time, the 2 of them had already arrived under an old pine tree at the side of the square. Jade toad ointment. The jade toad ointment of the spiritual bead peak. How did you get this thing? Ji Fei was startled. He looked at the small jade box in Zhao Ziru's hand, then raised his head to look at Zhao Ziru, and asked. Zhao Ziru smiled and said, "Not long ago, I helped the medicine granduncle with a small favor. He gave it to me." Seeing that Ji Fei did not intend to accept it, Zhao Ziru said anxiously, "Quickly accept it, your injury." Ji Fei looked at Zhao Ziru, then looked at the small jade box in her hand. Then, he said slowly, "Thank you for your kindness. The injury on my hand is just a flesh wound. It's not a big deal. This box of jade toad ointment might be of great use to you in the future. You should keep it for yourself." Ji Fei still knew about the jade toad ointment of the spiritual bead peak. This was a type of spiritual medicine made from the Snow Mountain ice toad and 10 other rare herbs to treat external injuries. With this kind of spiritual medicine, no matter how serious the external injury was, or even if one's arm was chopped off, it could be reattached. Moreover, it would be in perfect condition. There was no difference compared to before the injury. Although the cultivation of a cultivator was not above the corporeal body, if the corporeal body was injured, it would be like a cauldron being damaged. The essence in the body would leak out and affect the cultivation. Before condensing the primordial spirit or nascent soul, if a cultivator's dharma body was injured, it would affect the cultivation. Especially the cultivators in the awakening self realm, they were actually the same as ordinary people. Even if they suffered a fatal injury, they would still die. Only after breaking through to the transcending mortality realm and condensing the Tao core, nourishing the primordial spirit with the essence, qi, and spirit. When the primordial spirit and the Tao core became one, it was equivalent to a cultivator having 2 lives. Even if the corporeal body was destroyed, but the Tao core was not destroyed, the primordial spirit could temporarily reside on the Tao core. If there was an opportunity, it could even take over a complete body and cultivate again. "But your hand?" Zhao Ziru said anxiously. Her beautiful eyes looked at Ji Fei worriedly. "I appreciate your kindness, but I cultivate a body tempering technique. My body's healing ability is stronger than the average person's. This small injury will heal in less than 3 days. If I were to use the jade toad ointment for this, it would be a waste of God's gift," said Ji Fei with a smile. "This." Zhao Ziru saw that Ji Fei was unwilling to accept the jade box in her hand. She did not know what to say for a moment. "Yes. If junior sister has nothing else to do, I want to find a place to rest. There should be a fierce battle this afternoon," Ji Fei said. Then, "All right. Senior brother, you must be careful during the competition," Zhao Ziru said as she put away the small jade box in her hand. Her tone was filled with deep concern. This made Ji Fei's heart warm up. This junior sister Zhao. No matter how stupid Ji Fei was, he also understood Zhao Ziru's feelings at this moment. However, a person in the distance frowned when she saw this scene. That person was a slender middle-aged Taoist nun who wore a Taoist crown on her head and a green Taoist robe. Chapter 62. After Zhao Ziru left, Ji Fei found a place outside the square and sat down cross-legged. He circulated his body tempering technique, mobilizing the 5 elements yuan qi in his body and sending it to his arms. A layer of misty multicolored light emerged from his arms. If one observed carefully, one would notice that the skin and flesh of Ji Yufei's arms were trembling slightly. His tendons and bones were trembling, and his flesh was surging. A huge amount of yuan qi was like a glowing thread, passing through the tendons, bones, and flesh on his arms, forcing out the clotted blood and necrotic skin and flesh on his arms bit by bit. The 5 elements yuan qi was repairing the injuries on Ji Yufei's arms, and the skin on Ji Yufei's arms was gradually covered with a layer of dark and smelly blood. It had to be said that the healing power of Ji Yufei's body was really amazing. Every tendon and every muscle contained a powerful life yuan qi. His injuries were healing at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. The skin and flesh on both of his arms had split open like a spider web. In less than half an hour, a layer of scab had formed over them. Ji Yufei's cultivation had already reached the great success of changing marrow and blood changing, and had stepped into the realm of bone changing. The blood and qi flowing in his body had already been renewed, and there was a huge amount of life yuan qi in his blood and qi. The life yuan qi was constantly nourishing the tendons, bones, skin, and flesh of Ji Yufei's entire body. Even if Ji Yufei did not deliberately circulate his qi to heal his injuries, the injuries on his arms would be healed in a day or two. Now that he circulated the 5 elements yuan qi in his body to his arms, the speed at which the injuries healed immediately doubled. Just as Ji Yufei was healing his injuries outside the square, the matches on the other 6 arenas had also reached a white-hot stage. Above the 6 arenas, there was a vast and shocking fluctuation of magic power. On the other hand, the match between Ji Yufei and Ziyu was so hair-raising, and the victor was determined very quickly. As for the matches in the other arenas, it was difficult to determine the victor in a short period of time. On the first combat ring, Li Lingfeng's opponent was an extraordinary youth. He was young, tall, and had a gaze that was like cold stars. His hands formed seals, and with a raise of his hand, he struck out with layer upon layer of Dao arts. He was actually locked in an endless battle with Li Lingfeng. The Great Void Peak actually has such a character. I don't think I've heard of him. The disciples of the 9 lineages who were watching the battle below the arena whispered and pointed at the 2 people fighting above. Li Lingfeng's strength was in no way inferior to Ji Yufei's. Since the beginning of the 9 Peaks trials, no one had been able to last more than 15 minutes against him. More often than not, the winner would be decided in a single exchange. Li Lingfeng's cultivation base was higher than his peers, and he was publicly acknowledged as the number 1 figure among the younger disciples. But now, Li Lingfeng seemed to have met his match. Senior brother Yu Shu, when did you have such an amazing disciple? You've really hidden it well. On the steps in front of the Taishen Temple, the head of the Shaoyang Peak, spiritual master Chaoyang, who was sitting next to the head of the Great Void Peak, said with some surprise. The other heads also looked at Yu Shu. The Yu Shu Peak had actually produced someone who could contend against Li Lingfeng. It was really surprising that they didn't know about it beforehand. Haha. It's not that I'm trying to keep it a secret. In fact, I only found out a few days before the 9 Peaks trials that a young disciple of my lineage had suddenly made a breakthrough on the path of cultivation, Yu Shu said with a faint smile. How could the other heads of the other lineages believe Yu Shu's words? This disciple who could contend against Li Lingfeng was definitely someone that the Great Void Peak focused on cultivating. They had thought that there was no outstanding disciple among the younger generation of the Taishen Peak who could contend for the top 10, but it seemed that everyone was wrong. Level 8 cultivation base. If Li Lingfeng wants to win, he has to use his true strength, Daoist Shentian murmured as he watched the battle. Junior brother Qin, be careful. In the arena, Li Lingfeng no longer held back. He did not make any hand seals, nor did he recite any mantras. Suddenly, 8 rays of light of different colors rushed out of his body. Qin Daoyun, the disciple of the Great Void Peak, was immediately shocked. He felt that 8 different powers had burst out of Li Lingfeng's body. The power of the 8 phases of heaven and earth. How is this possible? Qin Daoyun's expression immediately changed. He did not dare to be careless. He quickly made a hand seal and attacked with all his strength. He cultivated the way of yin and yang, not the way of the 5 elements. Black and white qi swirled around his body. The yin and yang power that burst out of Qin Daoyun seemed to communicate with the yin and yang of the world. As he made a series of mysterious hand seals, the world around him began to tremble slightly. Yin and yang split the world, palm and finger overturn the universe. Qin Daoyun shouted softly. The black and white qi that represented the power of yin and yang quickly gathered from all directions. Then, in the sky above Li Lingfeng's head, they formed a huge palm that was half black and half white. It pressed down directly. Rumble. The huge palm in the sky pressed down like a mountain. The vast power of yin and yang shook the void and caused the arena below to tremble violently. However, Li Lingfeng, who was beneath the huge palm, had a calm look on his face. The power of the 8 elements swirled and surged around him, quickly condensing into 8 trigrams to block the power that surged down from the sky. The huge palm formed by the power of yin and yang above him seemed to have no effect on Li Lingfeng at all. Qian, Kuan, Zhen, Zun, Zhen, Dui, Kan Li. 8 trigrams appeared outside Li Lingfeng's body. The power of the 8 phases of heaven and earth immediately surged towards Li Lingfeng. The trigrams that represented the 8 phases of heaven and earth suddenly shone brightly, and the 8 kinds of power shook the sky. The spectators were all shocked. No one could have imagined that Li Lingfeng actually cultivated the innate 8 trigrams divine technique. He used his own power to form the 8 trigrams and communicate with the 8 phases of heaven and earth. Who could resist such a Dao technique? Li Lingfeng's Dao technique had a great origin. Even the 7 branch heads frowned. Only Taoist Shentian smiled without saying anything. It was said that in ancient times, there was an extremely talented god who comprehended the power of the 8 phases of heaven and earth. Then, he created the innate 8 trigrams divine technique that could shake the heavens and earth. The 8 trigrams divine technique allowed that god to move unhindered in ancient times. Only a few gods with similar great divine techniques could contend against him. This kind of divine technique was said to have disappeared along with that god. No one would have thought that it would appear on Li Lingfeng. The 8 trigrams divine technique was marvelous. When cultivated to great success, it could shatter the heavens and earth and reopen the chaos. It was one of the few great divine techniques in the world. With the innate 8 trigrams divine technique, Li Lingfeng was already in an invincible position. He pounced forward, his body merging with the Zun trigram. Zun was the wind, and Li Lingfeng seemed to transform into a gust of wind. He rushed out from the yin-yang giant hand that was pressing down from above. The other 7 trigrams circled around the gust of wind. It was a spectacular sight. By transforming his body into wind, Li Lingfeng moved as fast as the wind. He was unbelievably fast. The moment he rushed out from the envelopment of the yin-yang giant hand, Li Lingfeng made his move. He drew the Kan trigram that was circling around him into his right hand, and the Li trigram into his left. The 2 trigrams of Kan and Li appeared on his palms, with Kan representing water and Li representing fire. Boundless power of water and fire immediately gathered on Li Lingfeng's palms, and then, he thrust his palms towards Qin Daoyun. The Kan trigram and the Li trigram seemed to have condensed into tangible objects. They rushed out from Li Lingfeng's palms and quickly enlarged. The Kan trigram set off a monstrous torrent of water, while the Li trigram erupted with an earth-shattering sea of flames. The 2 mutually reinforcing and restraining forces intertwined and surged toward Qin Daoyun at the same time. Roar. Faced with the surging power of water and fire, Qin Daoyun let out a low roar and hurriedly gathered the power of yin and yang. The yin-yang giant hand that was descending from the sky immediately dissipated. The enormous power contained in the giant hand was restrained by Qin Daoyun. Yin-yang great shift. Qin Daoyun shouted. The power of yin and yang surged from his body. His long hair danced wildly in the wind. A monstrous power exploded from his body. Yin and yang qi instantly gathered in front of him and formed a black hole. He wanted to move the sea of flames and the monstrous torrent of water. However, the power of water and fire stirred up by the 2 trigrams was too strong. The moment Qin Daoyun's yin-yang vortex came into contact with the power of water and fire, it began to tremble violently. How could it be easy to move two such powerful forces away? After only a few short breaths, Qin Daoyun's black hole vortex was shattered by the power of water and fire. Whoa! Qin Daoyun let out a cry of surprise. He was directly knocked out of the arena by the surging power of water and fire. Amidst the gasps of the crowd, Qin Daoyun's body actually made a turn in the air and lightly landed below the arena. He did not seem to be injured by Li Lingfeng's move. Swoosh! The 8 trigrams entered his body, and the strange phenomenon that appeared from the power of water and fire immediately disappeared. The world suddenly became clear. There were no raging flames that covered the sky and the earth, no surging torrent of water. Everything that had just happened seemed like smoke in the eye, making people feel that it was extremely unreal. Many thanks to senior brother Li for showing mercy, Qin Daoyun said to Li Lingfeng, who was on the arena. The reason why he was not injured was that Li Lingfeng was unwilling to hurt him. Don't say that. I am also very impressed by junior brother Qin's magical Dao techniques. Li Lingfeng's words were extremely sincere. He did not have the slightest intention of making fun of Qin Daoyun. The two of them looked at each other and smiled, and then Li Lingfeng leaped down from the arena. The two of them returned to their respective formations. The disciples of the Taishan Peak were naturally elated, and the disciples of the Taishu Peak did not seem to be disappointed by their defeat. After all, no one had ever lasted so long against Li Lingfeng since the start of the 9 vein trials. Although he had lost, it was enough to show Qin Daoyun's strength. Today was already the last day of the 9 Peaks tournament. The 7 pairs of disciples fighting on the arenas had already come to an end. Li Lingfeng, Ji Yufei, and the other 5 disciples who had won would compete for the title of number 1 among the top 10 youths in the afternoon. And the 7 who had lost would compete for the last 3 spots among the top 10 youths. No one knew what kind of dogshit luck Dongfang Chen had, but he had actually defeated the strong opponent he had fought, and still had a chance to compete for the number 1 spot. On the contrary, the powerful Qin Daoyun and Zi Yu were extremely unlucky. They had encountered young powerhouses like Li Lingfeng and Ji Yufei, causing them to completely lose their chance to compete for the number 1 spot. Chapter 63. Without any suspense, after a fierce battle, when the sun was setting in the west and the sky was filled with rosy clouds, the fight for the first place was between Ji Yufei and Li Lingfeng. This was the most exciting scene in this 9 Peaks tournament. Of the top 7 young cultivators, only Song Ruochen from the sky-reaching peak had the lowest cultivation level. He was at the peak of the 7th sky of awakening. The other 6 were all at the 8th sky of awakening. As for Li Lingfeng's cultivation, he had already broken through to the 9th heavenly layer. If it wasn't for Ji Yufei's sudden appearance, the title of first place would have been his. First place? Ji Yufei was not interested. He just wanted to fight. He wanted to make breakthroughs in battle and improve himself in battle. Winning was good, but if he lost, he wanted to lose with a bang. And among the entire younger generation of the Taishan sect, only Li Lingfeng could be considered his strongest opponent. A warrior at the 8th sky of awakening was strong enough to compete with a cultivator at the 9th sky of awakening. There was no doubt about that. No cultivator at the same level as Ji Yufei was a match for him. Even if these cultivators had powerful magical treasures, Ji Yufei could still defeat them with his fists. He did not need magical treasures. He himself was a magical treasure, and his powerful body was comparable to a magical treasure. And now, Li Lingfeng did not seem to be using any magical treasures. Once he used the 8 symbols and 8 trigrams, even without magical treasures, he could defeat his opponent. Both of them had their own trump cards that others did not know about. The battle between Ji Yufei and Li Lingfeng had not even begun, but it was already full of imagination. Would Ji Yufei's battle skills be able to compete with Li Lingfeng's 8 symbols and 8 trigrams? No one knew. Both of them were young experts with peerless strength. Without competing, it was hard to judge whose battle prowess was a notch higher. Cultivators definitely had magical treasures on them. What was Li Lingfeng's magical treasure? Everyone was also very curious. Whether it was Daoist Shentian or the 7 branch heads, they were all looking at the 2 people on the second martial stage. One was an ordinary white-robed disciple with an ordinary appearance. He didn't release any powerful aura, and his ordinary appearance gave people a feeling of elegance and transcendence. On the other hand, the other youth had black hair that flowed down like a waterfall, a tall and straight figure, and a pair of eyes that were like the cold stars in the sky flickered with a terrifying light that gave others an oppressive aura. The young man in the second ring with a different temperament attracted the attention of the audience. Who would be able to compete for the top spot among the younger generation of the Taishen sect? Everyone was extremely nervous at this moment, especially the disciples of Taishen Peak. Li Lingfeng was recognized as the number one among the younger generation. But today, his number one position was challenged by a disciple from the Green Spirit Peak that had completely declined. Jiyu Fei was now the only one left of the entire Green Spirit Peak. He had now embarked on a path of cultivation that was different from that of his predecessors. On the second martial stage, Jiyu Fei and Li Lingfeng stood motionless, facing each other. The distance between them was only 9 meters. With the speed at which they were moving, this distance was not a distance at all. But the two of them were like wooden figures, standing there, neither making a move. Their eyes met in the void from time to time, and every time they looked, sparks seemed to shoot out in the void. This Li Lingfeng is indeed not simple. Jiyu Fei's pupils suddenly contracted. Li Lingfeng made him feel a great deal of pressure, and Jiyu Fei could no longer be as relaxed and calm as he was when facing other opponents. The awakening 9 heavens was the bottleneck of the first great realm of cultivation. Li Lingfeng's essence, qi, and spirit were completely full, and he had reached the stage of condensing his core. Although such a cultivator did not have the terrifying spiritual power of the shedding mortality realm, they had also cultivated their own spiritual power to the point where they could communicate with the power of heaven and earth for their own use, and borrow the power of heaven and earth to attack the enemy. In the face of such a cultivator, Jiyu Fei really did not have absolute confidence that he could defeat his opponent. The two of them stood there for half an hour. All the disciples of Taishen's sect who were watching the battle nervously under the arena were beginning to look impatient. The originally quiet square gradually began to whisper. The momentum of these two people has climbed to the peak. Why haven't they made a move yet? What are they waiting for? In the crowd, a disciple in white whispered. You don't know about this. They are waiting for an opportunity to make a move, a companion standing next to the disciple in white said aloud. An opportunity to make a move. Yes, an opportunity to make a move. 4 evenly matched experts like them, if they don't make a move, it will be earth-shattering. They must defeat their opponent in one move. As long as one side shows a flaw, the other side will immediately launch a fierce and peerless attack. At this time, another voice joined the conversation between the two. Boom. Right at this moment, a terrifying energy fluctuation suddenly erupted from the arena. After that, a thunderous sound resounded from the arena. Even though the sound wasn't loud, it resounded throughout the entire arena. It was not the spiritual power fluctuations that everyone was familiar with, but pure power fluctuations. That was Jiyu Fei making a move. Could he finally not hide it anymore? Everyone's eyes were glued to the arena. Sure enough, they saw Jiyu Fei stomp on the arena, and the entire arena suddenly shook violently. Then, Jiyu Fei's body was like a fierce tiger, leaving a series of afterimages in the void as he pounced on Li Lingfeng. The distance of 3 feet was covered in an instant, and a gust of strong wind immediately swept out from the arena. Roar. With a furious roar, Jiyu Fei, with his black hair fluttering behind him, clawed out with awe-inspiring might. A cold light more than a foot long shot out from the fingertips of his 5 fingers. The power of his fingers pierced through the void and directly clawed at Li Lingfeng's chest. The violent and rapid claw shadow caused the air to emit a dull explosion. It was as if even the air had exploded under the claw. It was incomparably ferocious. Jiyu Fei's skin, flesh, tendons, and bones had all been trained by him to be harder than iron, and he dared to go head-on against the magical weapons of cultivators. Now that he was using the claw technique that he had learned from the fierce tiger pouncing on its prey with all his strength, his 5 fingers that were even harder than fine iron definitely had the terrifying power to pierce through stone and gold. If one were to be clawed by his claw, there was no need to fear that 5 bloody holes would immediately appear on one's body, and their tendons would break and their bones would break. However, the bystanders only felt that this claw of Ji Yufei's was ferocious, but Li Lingfeng, who was facing this claw, had a completely different feeling, one that shook him to the core. This claw of Ji Yufei's had actually enveloped the surroundings, and it caused Li Lingfeng to have the feeling that he was unable to dodge. It was truly terrifying. What a good fellow, Li Lingfeng. He didn't panic in the face of danger. When the wind from the claw assaulted his face and caused him pain, with a single thought, a violet light flashed before him, and an object appeared to protect him. Ji Yufei was instantly startled, but his body had copper skin and iron bones, and he was utterly unafraid of any magical weapon of a cultivator at the level of the awakening realm. His right claw directly grabbed onto this object that was coiled with violet light. Clang! The ball of purple light in front of Li Lingfeng was immediately dispersed by Ji Yufei's claw, revealing a purple gold 8 trigrams. What was shocking was that when Ji Yufei's claw made contact with this violet gold 8 trigrams, it actually emitted an ear-piercing sound of metal rubbing against each other. Could it be that his hand was forged from fine iron? At the same time that the violet gold 8 trigrams blocked Ji Yufei's attack, Li Lingfeng rapidly retreated, pulling away from Ji Yufei. When exchanging blows with a cultivator like Ji Yufei, close combat was a great taboo for cultivators. The violet gold 8 trigrams was sent flying backward by Ji Yufei's heavy and fierce claw force. Li Lingfeng formed a seal with his hand, and the violet gold 8 trigrams immediately circled around his body and returned to his hand. However, a faint blush flashed across his face. Although Ji Yufei's attack had made contact with a magical weapon, it had still caused Li Lingfeng to suffer a considerable impact. After he stabilized his body, the blood in his chest immediately surged. Chapter 64. Magic Weapon. Ji Yufei's claw grabbed onto the purple gold 8 trigrams and was immediately shocked. The finger power that could pierce through stone and gold felt as if he had grabbed onto a piece of incomparably hard iron. The 5 fingers of his right hand were numbed by the powerful force of the purple gold 8 trigrams. The bones of his fingers shook and made a slight explosion sound. At this time, Li Lingfeng, who was on the opposite side, smoothed out the 5 faint finger marks on the purple gold 8 trigrams. He formed a spell with his hand and formed a hexagram. The purple gold 8 trigrams suddenly emitted a huge wave of magical power. Then, the 8 powers of the 8 elements of heaven and earth emerged on the purple gold 8 trigrams. Each hexagram corresponded to a kind of power. Misty water vapor, raging flames, thick earth chi, the power of mountains. The 8 powers of the 8 elements interchanged with each other on the purple gold 8 trigrams. They rotated and curled around each other, revealing a heavy pressure like that of a mountain. The spectators below the stage were all shaken and looked nervously at Li Lingfeng. The 8 hexagram rushed out from the purple gold 8 trigrams, setting off 8 kinds of power of heaven and earth. They spun and sealed off Ji Yufei. The 8 types of hexagram enveloped one side of the world. The 8 kinds of unparalleled power that rushed out from the hexagram intertwined and collided with each other. It actually caused the sealed part of the world to return to chaos, showing a shocking power. However, in the face of the hexagram that was sealing him from all directions, Ji Yufei felt a different kind of scene. The surging power of the 8 elements made him feel as if he had fallen into a chaotic energy storm, and at this time, he was in the eye of the storm. The power of the 8 elements of heaven and earth set off by the 8 major hexagrams seemed to have really imprisoned these 8 kinds of power. In an instant, Ji Yufei was drowned. The entire arena shook and trembled violently. If it were not for the protection of the magical power on the arena under the feet of the two would have collapsed long ago. The disciples of the Taishen sect who were watching the battle around the arena were all dumbfounded. They opened their mouths wide and forgot to close them. Yesterday, Li Lingfeng had already defeated the outstanding successor of the Great Void Peak, Qin Daoyun, with the power of the water and fire phases. Now, with the 8 phases simultaneously, and with the use of a magic treasure to drive the power of the 8 phases, its power was simply incomparable to the power of the water and fire phases yesterday. Among the younger generation of the Supreme Mystery Sect, only Ji Yufei could force Li Lingfeng to use his full strength, not daring to hold back. Long Hongxue, the head of the Purple Bamboo Peak, who was watching from the front of the Supreme Mystery Hall, said to Daoist Xiantian with a smile, "Senior brother sect master, it seems that your disciple, Li Lingfeng, has already won this match." Not necessarily. Daoist Xuantian's face didn't reveal any expression, and his tone was as calm as usual. Even the 7 branch heads couldn't see the slightest clue from his face. This purple gold 8 trigrams. Senior brother, I don't remember the sect having such a magic treasure. Zhenren Chaoyang, the head of the Shaoyang Peak, suddenly said with some surprise. On the arena, Li Lingfeng's purple gold 8 trigrams had already flown to the sky above Ji Yufei. It slowly rotated, emitting a powerful wave of magical power. The 8 trigrams on it all emitted a dazzling brilliance that shone down. The power of the 8 phases was mighty, completely trapping Ji Yufei. Ha. When Daoist Xiantian heard this, he actually gave a rare laugh, and then said proudly, "Our sect does not have this 8 trigrams among its treasures." Then, in that case, this magic treasure, when the heads of the 7 branches heard this, a look of astonishment appeared on their faces. They found it hard to believe, because what they were thinking of seemed to be too unbelievable. That 8 trigrams was made by Li Lingfeng himself. "It is not a treasure of the sect," Daoist Xiantian said with a smile. "A magic treasure made by himself?" A disciple who had yet to condense a Dao core in his body and had only been in the sect for 10 years could actually make a magic treasure himself. After receiving Daoist Xuantian's confirmation, the 7 branch heads couldn't help but be a bit shocked. Only a magic treasure made by himself can be used with ease. Daoist Xiantian sighed, his gaze never leaving the arena. Boom! Suddenly, a loud sound came from the arena. The purple gold 8 trigrams hanging in the sky began to shake violently. The power of the 8 phases below was like a surging wave, violently rolling, as if there was a primordial beast trying to break out of the space trapped by the 8 phases. The spectators below the arena were immediately startled by the loud sound. Their faces were filled with shock, and some people began to retreat into the distance. The spectators below the arena did not want to be caught in the crossfire of the battle between 2 young experts. Zhao Ziru, who was mixed in the crowd, was also extremely nervous. The power of the 8 phases had trapped Ji Yufei inside, which made her very worried. At this time, Ji Yufei had indeed encountered the most dangerous battle since the start of the 9 Peaks trials. Trapped within the 8 phases, Ji Yufei didn't dare to hold back any longer. He released all the power in his body. The energies of the 5 elements rushed out of his body and formed a layer of colorful flame around him. Terrifying energy waves surged out of his body and blocked the power of the 8 elements that surged over from all directions. 5 elements against 8 phases. Ji Yufei really felt like he was trapped within the 8 trigrams. It was as if a huge mountain was pressing down on his body, restricting his movements. Boom! The fist surrounded by golden light forced back the power of the 8 trigrams. Above the purple gold 8 trigrams, the heaven trigram that represented the power of the 8 trigrams trembled and flashed wildly. Li Lingfeng, who was making hand seals, also seemed to shake a little. The purple gold 8 trigrams were connected to his aura, as well as his spirit. When the magic treasure was attacked, he would also react. Li Lingfeng's expression was extremely solemn. He made hand seals again and again, and the magic power in his body surged. He struck at the purple gold 8 trigrams in the sky, causing it to shine brightly, and the power it released was even greater. He was fully activating the power of the magic treasure. If it was a demon that was sealed within the 8 phases, he could even use the power of the 8 phases to refine it. Right now, Li Lingfeng's 8-fold divine art was merely the tip of the iceberg. If he could fully master it, no matter how powerful a devil was, once it was trapped by him, even its body and primordial spirit would be completely refined. The devil would then completely disappear from the world and be deader than dead. Unfortunately, Li Lingfeng's 8 trigrams magic was still far from the day of mastery, and Ji Yufei's 5 elements combat skill also had great power. The 8 trigrams and 8 symbols divine art could not cause any substantial damage to Ji Yufei. Using the 5-element fist, the fist force was as heavy as a mountain, blasting away all the 8 trigrams and 8 symbols that were charging at him, making it difficult for them to get close to him. Ji Fei roared again and again in the world sealed by the 8 trigrams. The 8 trigrams shone brilliantly. Although it was blasted back, Ji Fei could not break the seal of the 8 trigrams and rush out. This was a collision between Taoist techniques and combat skills, a contest between cultivators and warriors. Li Lingfeng used Taoist techniques to activate the power of the 8 trigrams and the 8 powers of the 8 phases of heaven and earth, causing the world to lose its color. However, Ji Fei's performance was even more shocking. Every punch of the 5 elemental fist was as heavy as a mountain. With every punch, a dazzling 5-colored aura surged out. It was like a surging 5-colored wave that blocked the power of the 8 symbols. It was really surprising that he could burst out such a terrifying power with his body of flesh and blood. Very good. It seems that if I don't use that move, it will be difficult to break this formation. Ji Fei's long hair danced in the wind, and his eyes flickered with a fierce light. He planned to use his final trump card. In fact, Li Lingfeng's 8 trigrams magic had vaguely formed a mysterious 8 trigrams magic formation, firmly sealing Ji Fei. And the purple-gold 8 trigrams above Ji Fei was the eye of the formation. Li Lingfeng was not old, but not only did he refine his own magic weapon, but he also dabbled in formations. He was really a talented person with unlimited potential. At this time, Ji Fei could see that a protracted battle would be very disadvantageous to him. If he continued to drag it out with Li Lingfeng, he would very likely be the one to lose. This was because Li Lingfeng cultivated the Tao. Using Taoist techniques to guide the spiritual qi of heaven and earth for his own use was the instinct of a cultivator. Although Ji Fei could also absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, his power came from his own 5 elements yuan qi. He had not broken through to the transcending mortality realm, and he had not transformed his skin and flesh. He could not communicate with the heaven and earth, and make his yuan qi endless and endless. Whether it was a cultivator or a warrior, in the awakening self-realm, they could not reach the point where their mana and yuan qi were limitless. Only by breaking through the cultivation realm, from the awakening self-realm to the transcending mortality realm, could a cultivator condense a Tao core, and a warrior transform the blood vessels, tendons, bones, skin, and flesh. Only then could they achieve endless mana and yuan qi. Roar! Ji Fei let out a roar, and his black hair danced wildly. His eyes emitted 2 frightening rays of light, and he looked extremely ferocious. Peng! A violent force like the eruption of a volcano surged out from his body. In an instant, the clothes on his upper body were shaken into thousands of pieces, and the upper half of his body was completely exposed. His bronze skin flickered with a brilliant light, and it made people feel that he was powerful and terrifying. Clang! A light burst out from Ji Fei's right hand, and a tricolored light shot out from his hand. The tricolored divine light shrouded it, and it was the power of 3 of the 5 elements. The dusky gray was the earth elemental energy, the dazzling gold was the metal elemental energy, and the aqua blue was the water elemental energy. The power of the 3 elements shot out from Ji Fei's hand, and then it quickly shrunk from dozens of feet to about 10 feet. Ji Fei seemed to be very strained, and the blue veins on his right hand were bulging. His forehead was covered with soybean-sized beads of sweat, but before the sweat could flow down, it was evaporated by the huge yuan qi surging in his body. He forcefully combined the power of the 3 elements, and condensed it into a 3-colored sword light that was about 10 feet long. The 3 forces collided and intertwined with each other, but it was also more powerful and terrifying than the 3 elements combined. With Ji Fei's current cultivation, he could barely combine the 3 elements, and the time he could maintain it was very short. He was staking everything on this one throw, and if he didn't win, he would lose. Kill! Ji Fei shouted, and took a step forward. Dong! The entire arena suddenly shook violently, and there was a muffled sound. Then, he struggled to wave the light sword in his hand, and slashed at the Zhenghua trigram that was rushing over. The 3-colored sword light suddenly rushed up, like a dazzling divine light, and cut through the void. It was as if the space had been cut, and the Zhenghua trigram was silently split into 2 halves from the middle. Zhen was a mountain, and Zhenghua represented the mountain aspect of the 8 symbols. The mountain energy was extremely heavy, and the power condensed by the trigram was as heavy as a mountain. However, it was easily cut in half by Jiyu Fei's sword light that combined the three elements. Li Lingfeng was shocked when his magic was broken. He felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and his body swayed a few times. A trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. He was injured. After the sword light broke the Zhenghua trigram, it didn't dissipate. It directly broke through the world that was sealed by the power of the 8 symbols and the formation of the 8 symbols, and slashed out. Kai. There was a soft sound, and wherever the sword light passed, it immediately left a long sword mark on the arena, and rushed out of the arena. Everyone was shocked. When the 3-colored sword light rushed out of the arena, it had already become dim, as if it could dissipate at any time. However, no one dared to be careless. Wherever the sword light went, the people below the arena hurriedly dodged. A blue figure rushed out of the crowd, and a palm seal was pressed against the sword light. Chapter 65. The power of the 5 elements complemented and restrained each other. With the 3 elements combined into one, Jiyu Fei's strength had been raised to a terrifying realm. Powerful yuan qi fluctuations swept out in all directions like a gale with astonishing power. The 3-colored sword light in his hand was like a divine weapon that could split the heavens and the earth, blasting out a terrifying sword light that could tear the world apart. It actually broke through the power of the 8 symbols, causing Li Lingfeng, who controlled the purple gold 8 trigrams, to suffer a great impact. However, the mountain qi that had been broken by Jiyu Fei's sword exploded with a loud bang. The torrential power also made Jiyu Fei take 3 steps back. The skin and flesh that had been tempered like fine iron also cracked open with bloody marks. Roar. Jiyu Fei let out a roar. Under his roar, the whole arena shook violently like a big tree in a gale. The sound shook the sky. The young disciples who were watching the battle below the arena were immediately shaken by the sound wave, causing their ears to buzz. They were inexplicably terrified. Jiyu Fei was like the reincarnation of a god of war. He was so ferocious that it caused people's hearts to palpitate. He slashed out 7 times in a row as if he had gone mad. These 7 strikes could be said to be the 7 shocking strikes, condensing all the 3 elemental yuan qi in his body. The 3 elemental energies were all released in these 7 strikes. The 3-colored sword light was like a startling rainbow, tearing the void and sweeping in all directions. The cold sword qi spread out, causing people to feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. Without any suspense, the other 7 trigrams also collapsed under the sword strike of Jiyu Fei. The power that represented the 7 symbols of heaven and earth immediately exploded. The 7 forces of heaven and earth intersected with each other, forming a vast energy storm. This energy storm swept out like a surging wave, instantly drowning Jiyu Fei. Even if his body had copper skin and iron bones, the moment the terrifying energy storm hit him, Jiyu Fei suddenly felt as if his whole body was going to be torn apart by this terrifying power. All the bones in his body made cracking sounds, giving him a terrible feeling as if his tendons, bones, and flesh were being torn apart. Pain, all the skin, flesh, tendons, and bones of his whole body were suffering from the impact of the terrifying energy storm. His skin cracked open, and his skin, which was comparable to ordinary magic treasures, actually burst open. From this, one could imagine just how powerful the impact would be when the power of the 7 symbols exploded. Even though Jiyu Fei's body was already strong enough to directly withstand ordinary magic treasures, he was still injured. If it was an ordinary cultivator, then that cultivator would have probably been torn into pieces by the energy storm that erupted from this place a long time ago. Li Lingfeng's complexion immediately turned deathly pale when his 8-fold divine art was broken. Each of his divinatory diagrams was shattered by Jiyu Fei's unparalleled sword light, causing his body to shake violently and take a step back. The 8 divinatory diagrams were dispersed, but Li Lingfeng was forced to take 8 steps back. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth and dripped down the front of his clothes, giving Li Lingfeng a somewhat tragic feeling. The purple gold 8 symbols in the sky had already become dim, and it was on the verge of collapse. Break for me. Within the energy storm formed by the power of the 8-fold symbols, a furious roar suddenly rang out. The spectators below the arena were all startled. In the midst of the roar, a wild and ferocious aura spread out from the arena. Even the high-level disciples paled. The wild and unparalleled Jiyu Fei was awe-inspiring. As soon as the shout resounded out, everyone below the arena saw a dazzling three-colored sword light cleave straight up from the energy storm, and a shocking sword chi tore through layer upon layer of enormous waves of energy before slashing onto the purple gold 8 symbols in the sky with a bang. The purple gold 8 symbols was directly blasted flying, and it instantly became dim and lusterless. Moreover, the essence, energy, and spirit attached to the purple gold 8 symbols instantly dispersed. Li Lingfeng's head droned while the world spun around him, and he was unable to distinguish what was going on. His figure swayed repeatedly as if he was drunk, and he staggered a few steps back and almost fell on the arena. This Jiyu Fei is so ruthless. He actually dispersed the essence, energy, and spirit condensed on the purple gold 8 symbols with a single strike of his sword. This is no different from causing Li Lingfeng's painstaking efforts to be wasted. Some high-level disciples that knew a thing or two about equipment refinement couldn't help but whisper in discussion. The Tao of equipment refinement was to use one's own essence, energy, and spirit to refine a magic tool day and night so that it could be connected with one's own aura. By attaching a strand of divine sense onto the magic tool, one would be able to move the magic tool freely like one's own arm. If the essence, energy, and spirit that had been fused into a magic tool were dispersed, then not only would the magic tool's master suffer an extremely great impact, even the magic tool itself would instantly lose its spirit energy and spirituality, and it would be no different than an ordinary weapon. If one wanted to make a magic tool possess spirituality once more, then one had to fuse the essence, energy, and spirit into the magic tool once more. It could be said that this magic tool of Li Lingfeng's was half useless. After the purple gold 8 symbols were blasted flying, the three-colored sword light condensed by Jiyu Fei with the fusion of the three elements was unable to maintain its state any longer, and it dispersed. The three-colored sword light transformed into specks of qi that flickered indeterminately like fireflies, and they once again entered Jiyu Fei's body. When the 8 trigrams divine ability was destroyed, the storm of energy on the arena instantly vanished without a trace, and the energy of the 8 symbols that Li Lingfeng had driven over returned to the heavens and the earth. At this moment, blood seeped out from all 7 apertures on Jiyu Fei's face, and his appearance was terrifying to the extreme. When all the disciples that were spectating the battle below the arena saw Jiyu Fei's appearance, they instantly exclaimed in shock. Zhao Ziru, who was mixed within the crowd, was even more flustered. She didn't know to what extent exactly Jiyu Fei had suffered an injury, and this caused her to be extremely worried. Swoosh! Jiyu Fei, whose entire body was bathed in blood, took a stride forward, and he'd already arrived before Li Lingfeng, whereas Li Lingfeng was already on the verge of collapse at this moment. The 8 trigrams divine ability was destroyed, causing Li Lingfeng's essence, energy, and spirit to be severely injured, whereas essence, energy, and spirit were the source of magic energy, and Tao energy and magic energy were all refined from essence, energy, and spirit. At this moment, Li Lingfeng already didn't have the strength to fight any longer, and he who'd practically exhausted his magic energy would probably be unable to even endure a single punch from Jiyu Fei. You've lost. Jiyu Fei no longer had any thoughts of attacking, because although he had destroyed Li Lingfeng's 8 trigrams divine ability, he had already exhausted 95% of the essence in his body. However, Jiyu Fei still had the strength to fight. This was because even if his essence was completely exhausted, he still had a ridiculously powerful body. Just by relying on the strength of his physical body, he could still contend with ordinary martial cultivators for a while without being defeated. His powerful physique allowed Jiyu Fei to unleash his combat prowess to the fullest. His entire body had been tempered to the point where it was tough and soft at the same time. When it was tough, it was like metal, impervious to blades and spears, and difficult to be injured by Dharma treasures. When it was soft, it was like water, without any force. He could control all the muscles and bones in his body freely, and every part of his body could deal a fatal blow to the enemy. This was the terror of a martial artist. I've lost. Li Lingfeng was a little absent-minded. He couldn't accept this reality. He knew that Jiyu Fei was very powerful, but Jiyu Fei's strength had exceeded his expectations. Geniuses were all arrogant. Li Lingfeng was undoubtedly a genius among the younger generation of disciples in the Taishan sect, But this genius had been defeated today. Li Lingfeng slowly calmed down, and the trace of frustration and discouragement that had welled up in his heart disappeared in an instant. He adjusted his mentality in an instant. The legend of invincibility was just a legend. In reality, which genius had not suffered setbacks? Setbacks were not scary. What was scary was the mentality you used to face setbacks. Thinking of this, Li Lingfeng no longer felt the slightest sense of defeat. His eyes narrowed into two slits, and two rays of light that were as sharp as knives looked at Ji Yufei. "You're very strong. The next time we fight, I will defeat you. You will be my whetstone, a whetstone that will allow me to go further on the path of cultivation," Li Lingfeng said indifferently. "Very good." There was no expression on Ji Yufei's face, nor did he say anything superfluous. However, the strong desire to fight in his tone was not concealed in the slightest. The path of martial arts was different from the path of cultivation. Martial techniques were battle techniques. They were the strongest, most direct, and most primitive techniques that humans had comprehended in the ancient times, when they fought against the heavens, fought against the earth, fought against demons, ghosts, and thousands of ferocious beasts. They were the most powerful, direct, and primitive techniques that humans had comprehended in the endless slaughter. Chapter 66. The battle for first place had already been decided. Ji Yufei, a disciple of the Green Spirit Peak, was the biggest dark horse in this year's 9 Vein trials. His performance had shocked the entire Taishen sect. No one would have thought, not even the higher-ups of the Taishen sect, that the Green Spirit Peak, which had been silent for hundreds of years, and had even been forgotten by some of the old monsters in the sect, would once again enter the eyes of everyone. Ji Yufei's madness, not only made the hearts of the younger disciples of the 9 Veins of Taishen tremble, but also the higher-ups were deeply shocked. However, there were also people who did not think so, because in the past hundreds of years, no disciple of the Green Spirit Peak had been able to successfully enter the realm of transcending mortality. If he could not take that step, it meant that in 100 years, Ji Yufei would follow in his master's footsteps. At that time, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. No matter how glorious he was now, in 100 years, he could only turn into a handful of dirt. For martial cultivators, 100 years was too short. It passed in the blink of an eye. For martial cultivators who successfully entered the realm of transcending mortality, the direct benefit was that their lifespan was greatly increased, and living for hundreds of years was not a problem. In these hundreds of years, martial cultivators had a lot of time to make breakthroughs on the road of cultivation, even reaching the great accomplishment of the primordial spirit, nascent soul, and breaking into the realm of controlling the void. Of course, there were very few people who could reach the great accomplishment of the primordial spirit and nascent soul. Therefore, although Ji Yufei had shown shocking martial arts skills at the 9 Vein trials, some of the higher-ups of the Taishen sect were not optimistic about Ji Yufei because of this. For hundreds of years, no disciple of the Green Spirit Peak had broken through the shackles of cultivation and entered the realm of transcending mortality. Would Ji Yufei be an exception? No one thought that Ji Yufei could surpass the predecessors, because this hurdle was too difficult to surpass. The excitement of the day had already died down. Among the disciples of the 9 Veins, the most talked about thing was the only successor of the Green Spirit Peak, Ji Yufei. Ji Yufei had shown everyone that martial arts were not inferior to Taoist techniques. Pure power, as long as it was powerful enough, could break through all kinds of magical powers and spells. This was an unquestionable fact. There were 3,000 great Taos, and all of them could become saints. The path of cultivation was not the only one. Although the path of martial arts was full of difficulties, and it was very difficult to transcend the mortal world and become saints, once one succeeded in cultivating it, they would become an even more terrifying existence than martial cultivators. The fact that Ji Yufei defeated Li Lingfeng, who was in the 9th layer of the awakening state, was a very good proof. A bright moon hung high above the mountains, sprinkling down endless milky white moonlight, making the mountains seem as if they were shrouded in a layer of hazy gauze. There was light smoke and auspicious air rising, making the 9 peaks of Taishen look like the realm of immortals. In the supreme profound hall, the sect leader, Daoist Shen Tian, sat on his throne. He looked around at the 7 junior brothers sitting on his left and right, then said with a frown, "I wonder if any junior brothers have any suggestions on what I just said? Feel free to speak your mind. Senior brother, why did the Guangqing Celestial Sect and the Shangqing Sect request to open the ruined Sky Realm earlier? There is no reason for them not to know that opening the ruined Sky Realm is much more difficult before the time is right, and there is no guarantee of success." Xuanfa Daoist, who sat on the first seat to the right of Daoist Shen Tian, questioned. "Is there something we don't know about?" The Full Moon Peak chief Daoist Shen Kang said in a low voice, stroking his beard. In this year's 9 Peaks trials, no one from the Full Moon Peak had made it into the top 10, but Daoist Shen Kang did not seem to care and still looked calm. The Guangqing Celestial Sect and the Shangqing Sect would not dare to do anything behind our backs. Without our participation, they can forget about opening the ruined Sky Realm, Purple Bamboo Peak chief Long Hongxue said with some disdain. Although the 3 great Daoist sects were on the same side, they also shared different dreams. However, the 3 great Daoist sects each had their own backing and could not do anything to any of them. Even if the Guangqing Celestial Sect and the Shangqing Sect joined forces, the Taishen Sect was not worried. On the Tinglong continent, the Buddhist, Taoist, demon, and ghost sects represented the current situation of the entire cultivation world. The cultivation world of the Tinglong continent looked very calm on the surface, but there were undercurrents everywhere. Of course, the 3 great Daoist sects would not be so stupid as to kill each other and give other forces an opportunity to take advantage. Therefore, in the eyes of the Taishen sect, the Guangqing Celestial Sect and the Shangqing Sect would not be able to come up with any earth-shattering conspiracy, and they would not dare to. For the longevity grass, we must open the ruined Sky Realm, but we also have to guard against the Guangqing Celestial Sect and the Shangqing Sect playing tricks. In 3 days, send those 10 people down the mountain, Daoist Shen Tian said to the 7 peak chiefs after thinking for a long time. So urgent. Everyone present couldn't help but be a little surprised. Shenyuan Li Chen sent me a flying sword message, agreeing to open the ruined Sky Realm in a month. The ruined Sky Realm is in the 100,000 mountains, which is thousands of miles away. They should be able to get there in a month, Daoist Shen Tian said. It's half a month earlier than the astronomical changes that occur every 2 60-year cycles. What on earth are old monster Shenyuan and the others trying to do? Daoist Shen Tian, the chief of the Shaoyang Peak, gasped. To open the ruined Sky Realm, it needed to be coordinated with the astronomical changes. Otherwise, even a terrifying demigod would not be able to open the ruined Sky Realm. This was also why the 3 great Daoist sects could only open the ruined Sky Realm once every 120 years. Only the legendary demigods who could break through the void and transcend the mortal world could use their supreme magical power to break through the barrier of the macro world, tear through the void, and force their way into the ruined Sky Realm. But demigods who had reached the saint stage should have broken through the void and ascended to the legendary heaven realm. No one knew if there would still be a few immortals of this level left in the mortal world. Making wild guesses is not a solution. You will know the intentions of the Guangqing Immortal Sect and the Shangqing Sect when the time comes. Junior brothers, go back and make your preparations. Daoist Shen Tian waved his sleeve and stood up from his seat. In the world of cultivation, strength was always the most important thing. With Daoist Shen Tian's cultivation of the 9th heavenly layer of the void controlling realm, it was rare for him to meet a worthy opponent in the mortal world. He was not afraid of the Guangqing Immortal Sect and the Shangqing Sect schemes. Yes, senior brother. When the heads of the 7 branches saw Daoist Shen Tian stand up, they also quickly stood up and bowed to him before leaving the Supreme Mystery Hall. After the heads of the 7 branches left, Daoist Shen Tian returned to his cultivation area in the back hall and sat cross-legged on a praying mat. At this moment, one of the 2 Daoist children who were waiting outside the hall suddenly became extremely respectful, as if he was listening to something. Then, the Daoist child left the Supreme Mystery Hall and went straight to the back mountain. In the back mountain, in the peach forest, Li Lingfeng sat on the ground under an old peach tree in front of the wooden house. In front of him was a small tea table. On the small tea table was a saucer, and on the saucer was a purple clay teapot and a red clay teacup. In the teacup, There was a ball of dark green tea that emitted a faint fragrance. Singing to the moon, "How long will life be? I didn't think senior brother Lee would be so carefree." Suddenly, a clear voice came from the small path outside the plum forest. Then, a white figure came from the small path, stepping on the moon. Li Lingfeng didn't even bat an eyelid. He reached out and picked up the red clay cup in front of him. He first brought it to his nose and took a whiff. Then, he closed his eyes and enjoyed the fragrance of the tea. Only then did he drink the tea bit by bit. However, he didn't swallow it immediately. Instead, he left it in his mouth. The person passed through the plum forest. His steps were like flowing water and clouds, without the slightest trace of the secular world. Soon, he arrived under the old plum tree in front of the wooden house. "Junior brother Ziyu, why have you come?" Li Lingfeng had already drank the tea in his mouth bit by bit. Then, he put the red clay teacup on the tea table in front of him. The person who came was Ziyu. He smiled and sat down opposite Li Lingfeng. "Yes." Ziyu took a deep breath and said, "Good tea." The fragrance of the tea lingers and lingers in the nose. It makes one feel relaxed and happy. "Haha, I only know about the way of tea." Li Lingfeng smiled. Then, with a flip of his hand, a red clay teacup appeared in his hand. "Come, have a taste." As he spoke, Li Lingfeng placed the teacup in front of Ziyu. Then, he picked up the teapot and filled it up gently. "Senior brother, that Jiyu Fei." Ziyu wanted to say something but stopped. He seemed to be hesitating. Right now, the only person who dared to mention Jiyu Fei in front of Li Lingfeng was Ziyu. As expected, the moment Li Lingfeng heard Jiyu Fei's name, his brows immediately furrowed. He put down the teapot and said indifferently, "Why did you mention him, junior brother?" Ziyu smiled awkwardly. "Nothing much. I just felt that senior brother losing to Jiyu Fei was a little unexpected. Does that Jiyu Fei really have such strength? Senior brother couldn't have lost to him on purpose, right?" "What are you saying?" Li Lingfeng was a little unhappy. He said with some displeasure, "Why would I show mercy to Jiyu Fei in a major event like the Nine Peaks trials? That Jiyu Fei does have such strength. He deserves to be number one." When Ziyu heard this, he could not help but be somewhat surprised. Li Lingfeng was their eldest senior brother, and was publicly recognized as the number one person in the younger generation. But now, following Li Lingfeng's defeat, the disciples of Taishen Peak also felt humiliated. "Senior brother, you are only one step away from condensing your core of whey. Now that you have the essence condensation pill, the matter of condensing your core is already set in stone. The next time you fight, you will still be number one among the younger disciples," Ziyu said with a smile. Many people heard the conversation between Li Lingfeng and Jiyu Fei in the arena. At this time, Ziyu had already understood why Li Lingfeng said that. The top 10 of the Nine Peaks trials could receive a reward from the sect. It was a precious pill that could greatly increase the success rate of condensing a core of whey for martial cultivators who had awakened from the ninth heaven. With Li Lingfeng's level of cultivation, even without the essence condensation pill, he would definitely be able to successfully condense his core. Now that he had the essence condensation pill, wouldn't it be easy for him to condense his core of whey? Martial cultivators in the transcending mortality realm could use their core of whey to communicate with the inside and outside of their body, drawing upon the spirit chi of heaven and earth. Through the core of whey, they could quickly convert the power of heaven and earth into their own spiritual power. In this way, the martial cultivator's spiritual power would be endless and would never dry up. The power of the path techniques and techniques that he could use would definitely be several times stronger than when he had awakened from the ninth heaven. Unless Jiyu Fei could break through to the ninth heaven, perhaps he would not be able to match Li Lingfeng. Martial artists who had awakened from the ninth heaven could still contend with martial cultivators at the first heaven of transcending mortality realm. This was because with every increase in cultivation, Jiyu Fei's strength would also multiply. "I'm improving, but there's no guarantee that others won't improve as well. The path of cultivation is like rowing a boat against the current. If you don't advance, you'll fall behind. You can't take any shortcuts," Li Lingfeng said with a serious expression. Ji Yufei's improvement was just too fast. He didn't seem confident that he could surpass him in a short period of time. After all, he, Li Lingfeng, had personally witnessed Ji Yufei break through from the 7th heaven to the 8th heaven in the past few days of the Nine Peaks trials. Li Lingfeng felt a chill in his heart just thinking about how fast his cultivation had risen. He felt that it was inconceivable. Ziyu still wanted to say something, but at this moment, both of them seemed to sense something and looked towards the small path. Not long after, a short figure appeared on the small path illuminated by the moonlight. The boy in front of the hall? What's he doing here? When Li Lingfeng and Ziyu saw who it was, they couldn't help but feel a little surprised. The person who had come was the Dao boy who served in front of the Supreme Mystery Hall. Chapter 67. In the rear hall of the Supreme Mystery Temple, where Daoist Shentian cultivated, Li Lingfeng respectfully stood before Daoist Shentian with his head lowered. He didn't know why Daoist Shentian had summoned him. Even after a long while, Daoist Shentian remained motionless on the praying mat, as if he hadn't noticed Li Lingfeng's arrival. As for Li Lingfeng, he didn't even dare to breathe loudly in front of the sect master. Although this wasn't his first time being summoned by the sect master, Li Lingfeng couldn't help but feel a sense of reverence for him as he stood before Daoist Shentian. Less than an hour later, Daoist Xuantian's eyelids twitched. Then, the purple gold 8 trigrams that never left Li Lingfeng's body suddenly trembled and flew out of Li Lingfeng's body. Startled, Li Lingfeng hurriedly looked up. At some point, Daoist Shentian had already opened his eyes. The purple gold 8 trigrams he had refined himself were now floating in front of him. Greetings, Grandmaster. Li Lingfeng hurriedly knelt on the ground. Yes. Daoist Shentian only nodded, then focused on the purple gold 8 trigrams in front of him. His eyes flashed like lightning, and with a single glance, he saw the inside and outside of the purple gold 8 trigrams. The purple gold 8 trigrams were only about half a foot in diameter, much smaller than when Li Lingfeng and Ji Yufei had fought today. Clearly, Li Lingfeng had refined it to the point where it could grow or shrink at will. Tchem. I didn't think Ji Yufei's sword energy would be so powerful. Daoist Shentian stared at the sword mark on the purple gold 8 trigrams and exclaimed. The sword mark had split the purple gold 8 trigrams in half. The sword mark was so deep that it almost split the 8 trigrams in half. There's no spirituality at all. The essence of the artifact has been completely scattered. Daoist Shentian muttered to himself. Then, he pointed at the purple gold 8 trigrams that had lost its spirituality and turned into stubborn metal. Buzz! The purple gold 8 trigrams immediately shook, and transparent ripples that were visible to the naked eye spread out from the purple gold 8 trigrams. Then, the sword mark on the purple gold 8 trigrams actually healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, there was no longer any damage to the 8 trigrams. Daoist Shentian had used his great power to repair it. The only flaw was that the purple gold 8 trigram was still a piece of stubborn iron without any luster or spirituality. However, this wasn't a problem for Daoist Shentian. His right hand reached out towards the kneeling Li Lingfeng, and a strand of essence was immediately expelled from Li Lingfeng's body. Daoist Shentian then raised his right hand and sent the wisp of essence, energy, and spirit he had expelled from Li Lingfeng's body into the purple gold 8 trigrams. Peng! When that strand of essence, qi, and spirit entered the purple gold 8 trigrams, the purple gold 8 trigrams immediately shone brightly. The 8 trigrams seemed to have come to life, turning into 8 rays of light that rushed out of the purple gold 8 trigrams and circled around it. At the same time, Li Lingfeng, who was still prostrating on the ground, shuddered. Somehow, he could sense the existence of the purple gold 8 trigrams again. The connection between him and the purple gold 8 trigrams that had been severed was restored at this moment. Take it. Daoist Shentian waved his sleeve, and the purple gold 8 trigrams that had regained its spirituality flew towards Li Lingfeng. With his cultivation, restoring the purple gold 8 trigram spirituality was as easy as raising his hand. If Li Lingfeng were to refine his essence, energy, and spirit into the purple gold 8 trigrams again and refine its spirituality, who knew how much time and effort he would have to spend? Thank you, Grandmaster. Li Lingfeng was extremely excited. He hurriedly and respectfully reached out to receive the purple gold 8 trigrams that flew to him. With a thought, the 8 trigrams around the purple gold 8 trigrams merged back into the 8 trigrams. The entire purple gold 8 trigrams was flowing with a layer of misty luster, as if there were streaks of light that were as thin as hair wandering on its surface. Obviously, the purple gold 8 trigrams had regained its spirituality. "Get up," Daoist Shentian said calmly. "Yes." Li Lingfeng put the purple gold 8 trigrams back into his magic treasure pouch, then rose to his feet and stood respectfully to the side. "You can go back now." Daoist Shentian seemed to have asked the Daoist boy to summon Li Lingfeng, but he only needed to repair Li Lingfeng's magic treasure, and then told him to leave. Li Lingfeng was also very surprised to hear that. However, the actions of the sect leader were not something he could control. If the sect leader did not say anything, he would not dare to ask. "Yes." Li Lingfeng, who was full of questions, retreated. In the huge stone chamber, only Daoist Shentian was left. After a long time, he murmured to himself, "With this purple gold 8 trigrams, I believe you will be able to protect yourself in the ruin heaven realm." With that, Daoist Shentian closed his eyes again, as if he had turned into a stone statue, and did not move an inch. At the same time, in the cave abode on Jade Spirit Peak, Ji Yufei sat cross-legged in the middle of the hall. He was bare-chested, wearing only a pair of shorts. His eyes were closed, and a vast wave of yuan qi was spreading from his body, sometimes strong, sometimes weak. Specks of 5-colored light surrounded him, which was the pure power of the 5 elements that had gathered from all directions. He was healing his injuries, and the Tai Chi yin and yang pattern on his chest was emitting gentle yin and yang qi, which increased the speed at which the 5-element spiritual energy gathered by 10 times. Surrounded by the energy of the 5 elements, the muscles all over Ji Yufei's body were slightly trembling. Strands of energy of the 5 elements seeped into his body through the pores all over his body, then melted into his flesh, tendons, and bones, replenishing the yuan qi he had consumed during the battle with Li Lingfeng during the day. The cracked skin on his body had long since scabbed over. His body, which had been thoroughly tempered, had an astonishing healing ability. Wave after wave of 5-element spiritual energy washed through his flesh and bones, forcing the clotted blood out of the injured parts of his body. As his flesh and blood surged, the injured parts of his body rapidly regenerated and healed. After breaking into the 8th heaven, Ji Yufei's entire body had been tempered to the point that the inside and outside of his body had become one. With a single thought, an enormous amount of yuan qi could reach every inch of his body. Ji Yufei's realm of controlling his body had reached an unimaginable level. Ji Yufei guided the 5-element spiritual energy outside his body, letting it pass through his flesh and blood and enter his internal organs and bones, causing every inch of his body to be filled with a 5-colored glow. Through the frequency of his breathing, the impure yuan qi in his internal organs, flesh, and bones was expelled from his body through the pores of his skin. His flesh, bones, and internal organs were constantly tempered and improved by the purest 5-element spiritual energy. Ji Yufei's physique was slowly changing. The cultivation of martial arts was to constantly temper the body and unearth the hidden treasures in the body, breaking the shackles of the human body, and unlocking the mineral deposits of energy in the body, realizing the continuous transformation and sublimation of the self. Ji Yufei believed that one day, he would also be able to enter the Tao through martial arts and break through the boundaries of life and death, stepping into the legendary realm of immortal. 6 hours later, Ji Yufei woke up from his meditation and walked out of the cave. At this time, the bright moon was already setting in the west. A cool breeze was blowing gently outside the cave. In the cracks of the rocks, unknown insects were chirping tirelessly. There was no other sound in the surroundings. It was very quiet. Chapter 68. At the foot of Green Spirit Peak, there was a clear lake in the middle of the bamboo forest. From time to time, the mountain breeze would blow, swaying the bamboos and rustling bamboo leaves. Suddenly, there was a strange rustling sound in the bamboo forest. Someone was running quickly in the bamboo forest. Several birds were startled and flew into the sky, flying into the distance. Whoosh! A silhouette appeared at the edge of the lake. Then, without any hesitation, he leaped into the lake. Plop! The calm surface of the lake, which was as calm as a piece of jasper, immediately set off waves. The calmness of the small lake was instantly broken by the arrival of this person. Splash! Water splashed in all directions, and a person emerged from the lake. The area around Green Spirit Peak was the cultivation area of Green Spirit Peak, one of the 9 branches of Taishan. In the dead of night, there would definitely be no disciples of other branches appearing here. The person who rushed into the lake was Ji Fei. At this moment, he was swimming in the lake, washing away the bloodstains on his body. The cold lake water not only cleansed his body, but also his soul. At this moment, Ji Fei's heart was at peace. His tense nerves for the past few days had completely relaxed without him realizing it. Then, he actually began to circulate the ancient mysterious art in the lake. All of this seemed very natural. Ji Fei did not force himself to cultivate, so his body naturally reacted in this manner. Then, the entire lake rippled. Wisps of spiritual qi gathered and fluctuated. Ji Fei was shrouded in a layer of mist and his figure became blurry. Slowly, Ji Fei stopped swimming on the surface of the lake and disappeared. He sank to the bottom of the lake, but the layer of mist on the surface of the lake didn't dissipate. The lake water calmed down. Ji Fei entered a mysterious state. He seemed to have become one with the surrounding lake water. The fish in the lake were not afraid of this intruder and swam around him. This feeling was very strange. It was as if he could feel the aura of heaven and earth. In a trance, Ji Fei felt that his aura seemed to really merge with heaven and earth and become a part of nature. This was a kind of mysterious martial state similar to epiphany. He no longer needed to breathe because all the pores on his body were opening and closing. He had entered the internal breathing state, a breathing method that allowed him to absorb nutrients from the surrounding space without using his nose. Endless spiritual energy was integrated into his body from his skin, and the turbid air was naturally discharged from his pores. Unknowingly, in this dreamlike state, Ji Fei's body was stimulated with a special ability. As long as Ji Fei was not in an absolute vacuum, there was no possibility of him suffocating. After an unknown amount of time, Ji Fei opened his eyes and rose from the bottom of the lake. In the east, a rising red sun hung high above the mountains, bathing him in the gorgeous morning glow. However, Ji Fei sensed that something was amiss the moment he emerged from the water. Without any hesitation, he shot out of the lake like a fish with a poof. Li Lingfeng. In an instant, Ji Fei appeared on the edge of the lake. At the same time, he also discovered the source of the abnormality. Next to a cluster of bamboo by the lake stood a young man in white. An ordinary-looking young man in white. However, it was this ordinary-looking young man that made Ji Fei feel a hint of danger. Ji Fei, have you been cultivating in the lake all night? A strange look flashed in Li Lingfeng's eyes. When did Li Lingfeng get here? Ji Fei thought to himself. He was in a strange martial realm, so he did not notice Li Lingfeng's arrival. This made him feel a little uneasy. Ji Fei flung his long, wet hair and walked towards Li Lingfeng with a faint smile. The wounds on the surface of his body had long since disappeared. His skin flickered with a sparkling luster, as if he had never been injured in the first place. Peeking at other people's cultivation is a big taboo. There's no way you don't know that. Ji Fei walked over step by step, but the aura coming from his body was gradually increasing. Li Lingfeng's expression changed when he heard this, but then he smiled and said, "You're looking for an excuse to fight me, aren't you? Unfortunately, I don't want to fight you for the time being." Ji Fei did not enjoy himself to the fullest during the fight for first place in the arena yesterday. It was because the arena was too small, and he could not fight to his heart's content. As soon as Li Lingfeng's 8 trigrams divine ability appeared, it enveloped the entire arena. Ji Fei had no place to hide, and he was obediently trapped in the 8 trigrams. If he was not confined to the space of the arena, Ji Fei could have completely avoided the 8 trigrams, and he would not have been forced to fight with his life on the line. Now that he encountered Li Lingfeng again, Ji Fei could not help but feel a little itchy. Now that you're in my place, it's not up to you whether you want to fight or not. Ji Fei took a step forward, and he was already 6 meters away from Li Lingfeng. At this distance, Ji Yufei only needed to stretch out his hand to launch an extremely fierce attack at Li Lingfeng. It was a great taboo for cultivators to allow a cultivator to get close to them. In terms of fist and leg skills, cultivators were not a match for cultivators at all. Moreover, every move of Ji Yufei's combat skills were extremely fierce, and they were killing moves that could kill the opponent the moment he attacked. The battles between cultivators were the most dangerous, and life and death could often be determined at the first contact. Eat my fist. A fierce light flashed in Ji Yufei's eyes, and his body suddenly became blurry on the spot. Whoosh! A strong gust of wind rose out of thin air, and it instantly ruffled the clear water of the lake. At practically the same time, Li Lingfeng suddenly felt an extremely dangerous aura envelop him in an instant. A chill shot up from the back of his spine, and all the hair on his body immediately stood on end. He didn't even think about it. He didn't have time to think about it. Li Lingfeng patted the magic treasure pouch on his waist, and the violet gold 8 trigrams immediately flew out and blocked in front of him. The 8 trigrams surged out, and the water in front of him was unable to flow in. In the next moment, Ji Yufei's body appeared in front of Li Lingfeng, and his right fist directly blasted towards the 8 trigrams that seemed to have taken form. Golden waves swept out in front of Ji Yufei's fist, and the fist force was like a surging river, and its indomitable momentum was completely revealed. The dazzling golden fist aura dyed the whole heaven and earth gold, and the terrifying fluctuation of yuan qi directly shook the whole space. Even the earth started to tremble, and the bamboo nearby was completely shattered by the fist force, turning into fragments that shot out all over the sky. Boom! The unparalleled fist aura instantly collided with the 8 trigrams, and the 8 trigrams suddenly trembled violently, and 8 kinds of dazzling light burst out. The power of the 8 symbols of heaven and earth surged violently. The 8 trigrams seemed to be connected to a world of 8 symbols, and it actually swallowed the unparalleled fist force. However, the fist force of Ji Yufei was really too strong, and 7 of the 8 trigrams had successively collapsed, and only the Zun trigram was still in operation. The 8 trigrams had collapsed, and Li Lingfeng's face instantly turned deathly pale. Seeing that Ji Yufei was about to launch a second punch, he hurriedly formed a seal with his hand, and recalled the Zun trigram that represented the power of the wind. Then, his body and the trigram merged, and he turned into a gust of strong wind that flew out of the bamboo forest. The purple gold trigram was immediately put into the magic treasure pouch at his waist. I haven't had enough fun yet. Where are you going? Ji Yufei shouted, and his right foot pushed off the ground. Peng! With a bang, the soil splashed, and the ground under his foot immediately burst open. But he had already used the force to support himself, and turned into a golden lightning, chasing after the gust of strong wind that Li Lingfeng had turned into. This guy Ji Yufei is really abnormal, and his strength seems to have increased a lot. Li Lingfeng was secretly shocked. Under Ji Yufei's punch, he had almost triggered the internal injuries he had suffered yesterday, so how could Li Lingfeng still dare to continue fighting with Ji Yufei? If he was at his peak, Li Lingfeng was not afraid of Ji Yufei, but now, he was not as good as Ji Yufei, because Ji Yufei was at his peak, and he, Li Lingfeng, could not display his peak strength. His body and the Zun trigram merged, and Li Lingfeng seemed to have turned into a gust of wind. His speed was unparalleled, and in the blink of an eye, he had rushed out of the bamboo forest. Ji Yufei, pass on the order of the head teacher. In 3 days, in the morning, the top 10 experts will gather at the Supreme Mystery Hall, and you must not be absent. Li Lingfeng did not stop at all, and instantly went far away. His voice came from afar, and it was abnormally clear. Whoosh! Outside the bamboo forest, a golden figure rushed out of the bamboo forest like a bolt of lightning. His extremely fast-moving body brought with it a strong gust of wind, and the bamboo leaves on the ground were suddenly blown into the air by the gust of wind, dancing in the air. Ji Yufei's body seemed to be wearing a golden armor, and the metal energy was like a golden flame that steamed around his body. He stood outside the forest, staring in the direction that Li Lingfeng disappeared in, and a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. This Li Lingfeng's speed. Ji Yufei clenched his fists, and an evil smile suddenly appeared on his face. Interesting, he actually used only 1 night to repair that magic treasure. This opponent is not bad. This time, Jiyu Fei was wrong. The purple gold 8 trigram was not repaired by Li Lingfeng, but Jiyu Fei, even if he broke his head, could not imagine that someone had repaired the magic treasure for Li Lingfeng. Gather at the Supreme Mystery Hall? Just what is it for? Jiyu Fei was a little confused. The golden light that pulsed around his body had gradually weakened, and finally disappeared into his body, leaving only traces of a golden luster flowing on his skin. The power of the metal element was invincible. Compared to the other 4 elements, its attack power was the fiercest and fiercest. Using it to fight with others, it was truly indomitable. In a battle, momentum was very important. A strong momentum could make the opponent's heart palpitate, make the opponent lose their mind, and gain the upper hand even before the battle began. Let's talk about it in 3 days. Jiyu Fei muttered to himself for a moment, then turned around and walked into the bamboo forest. However, he did not dare to ignore Li Lingfeng's words, because he had come to pass on a message from the head teacher, Daoist Shentian. Jiyu Fei was not so arrogant that he could ignore the words of the Supreme Mystery Sect's sect leader, Daoist Shentian. 3 days later, Jiyu Fei returned to the cave, changed into a set of clean clothes, and sat on the praying mat. He had a vague feeling that something would happen in 3 days. He suddenly took out a small box from his body, looked at it, and then sighed. He opened the small box, and a burst of fragrance immediately rushed into his nose. A vermilion red pill was quietly lying in the box.